podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to our weekly episode of On This Week on Haway The Podcast. And apologies, you've got me this week. I was gutted to miss the last episode, but Martin is missing out this week. And I suppose after weeks of talking about signings and pre-season tours, we're now getting into the meat of the opening month of the football season, because today we look specifically at the 25th all the way to the 31st of August at Sunderland AFC down the years. And we, just like other weeks, we might not be looking at the biggest things to happen or go through all of the events that occurred on those days. Some of them that we've picked out just to mention even, or go down the rabbit hole, they might be obscure or downright crap. Or like today, we might have a segment on a Sunderland legend. But that is all to come, because first I need to introduce the two gentlemen who will take us on this merry dance down memory lane. And our first expert storyteller today is Andrew Smithson. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Chris. Nice to see you.
Yeah, I was gutted to miss that last week and listening in. I mean, the Jim Baxter thing. But I was going to ask, I mean, we're talking about all those pre-season tours, and we're talking about going to hellholes in Norway in the 90s and all this sort of, and the American tour. Are you disappointed to be kind of leaving all that behind, or are you enjoying getting into the meat of the season?
Oh, it's boring now, the real football, isn't it? You know, we've seen all these teams before. We've heard all of the names. It's like at the moment, the transfer window's still open. So I'm sure some people aren't actually bothered about the results on a Saturday afternoon. They're like, yeah, okay, fine. We'll beat West Ham 3-0. Everyone's happy. But who we're going to sign next? We need another multi-million-pound international star to be jetting in. So yeah, sorry if you're listening to this. It's just going to be plain old football from now on for the next few months. We'll try our best to add a bit of energy to it.
Well, to be fair, that's how I think of us. I think of us in the week. It's a bit of a change of pace. That's how I like to see us. It's a bit of, dare I say it, last of the summer wine. But we'll see see what comments we're getting. But to join us as well, of course, we have the legendary Kelvin Beattie. Hello, Kelvin.
Good morning, Nora. How are you today?
I've got my baggy tights on, don't worry, I'm nice and warm.
Hey.
Tell you what, it's getting nippy, mind. I don't know where this sun's gone. Bloody hell, I've been cold the last couple of days. But anyway, I mean, Kelvin, in terms of getting into the season, are you glad to get into some of the actual games that you went to back in the day?
Oh, yeah, there's some cracking stuff coming up today as well. You'll need to shut my microphone off, I think, if we hit 3 o'clock, just switch us off.
Yeah, well, we genuinely, we started off this, you know, the length of these things. We didn't design it this way. We didn't mean to do this. It's just the first episode we started talking. And now they've all been this length. And yeah, we just talk until we stop, basically. But yeah, I mean, let's get into it, and let's start with, because I actually missed it, Andrew, and I obviously missed last week's episode. So if you can start with the quiz from last time round, please.
Yes, I will do. You were busy going downhill in a bathtub last week, weren't you, Chris? I'm sure that's what you were up to.
I mean, that should now be the artwork for every one of these, really, shouldn't
it? Yes. Last week I did set a quiz question. 1982, Sunderland beat the reigning European Cup holders Aston Villa on August the 28th. Now, that's actually a game I'm going to focus on as we get through the pod. But the quiz question was based around that. Sunderland won 3-1, and I asked who our scorers were. Kelvin, have you remembered those, or are you waiting for me to go through the game?
You know what?
Later?
I should remember them, because obviously I'm going to say to you I was at the game.
I was counting on that, Kelvin. I've actually not done any research. I was just going to let you rattle off all the stats.
I'm going to let you down, but I'll give you a clue for the oldies. He has a song coming up. He'll take more care of you. Ali McCoy's. Ali McCoy's.
What episode of Last of the Summer Wine was that? Compo's necking a pint in one go whilst you're in the background singing.
That's the theme from the breakfast show on TalkSport that he's got now, isn't it?
Was it not? Good. I think that was British Airways advert, wasn't it?
Was it? I'd
back
never
in
heard
the
that
day.
one.
We stole the tune and gave it to Ali McCoist, I think. So.
Never heard that one.
I hope we don't owe royalties now to the airline because you've gone and ripped off their...
Well, if we do, we'll just have to take flight.
We'll just say Kelvin was out of tune and it was a different one.
Lads, even for us, this is an early start into absolute... Anyway, yes, back to the matter in hand. We've beaten the European Cup holders here, you know. I don't know why we're talking about flipping British Airways. Yes, the scorers for Sunderland were Colin West. Our second was by Ali McCoist, as beautifully pointed out there by our resident songsmith. And it was Nick Pickering that rounded things off to give us a really impressive 3-1 win. And as I say, as the episode goes on, we'll do a bit more of a deep dive into that game because it's a pretty big win for the lads, that one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to you getting into that, Andrew, because I want to see if Kelvin, just like he obviously did in '66 when Scotland became world champions, I want to see if he thinks Sunderland became European champions that day. So it'd be good to get into that. So look, let's get into the dates themselves. Let's start with the 25th of August. And some of the ones we picked out today, we go back to 1951. The Clown Prince of Soccer, and I've told a couple of stories. I think my dad passed on to me about Len Shackleton. He, on this day, on the 25th of August 1951, he netted his only Sunderland hat-trick, which surprised me, actually, that he only scored one with all the goals he scored and how talented he was. It was in a 3-0 home victory over Manchester City in 1951. We move on to 1984. Gary Bennett, he scored after 2 minutes in his debut in a 3-1 home victory over Southampton. The match also saw the debuts of Steve Berry, Howard Gale, and Clive Walker. I mean, just quickly on that, I'll start with you, Kelvin, if that's okay, 1984, because that was obviously... I'm quite interested to know the start of that season because we won 3-1, home win. Gary Bennett scored into his debut. But I mean, what was the feeling like around that season? Because obviously it ended in relegation in a cup final.
Brilliant start of the season. And Bennett, I have to say, when we were talking about Stan Varga last week, weren't we? Where Bennett had a really, really good debut. He was as prominent up front as he was in defence. I'll tell you what I had forgotten was that Steve Berry made his debut in that game, but it must have been a quiet one because I cannot remember much about what he did. But we were rampant. We played some good football. I think they came to play. Which made a game of it. But it was a great start. It was a good goal. He just charged up the pitch and like he always used to, you know, he just took off and sometimes he would take off as you know, if you watched him yourself, he would take off and be caught badly out of position. And sometimes it panned out really well for him, and on that occasion it was a cracking goal. It was good feel. I remember walking down the Fulwell steps after the game thinking, whoa, we're on here. Big Lenny's going to do it for us. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, because obviously that day we beat Laurie McMenemy, Southampton as well, 3-1. And obviously, you know, then the next summer he took over at Sunderland from Len Ashurst. But again, I was just looking as well in that Southampton side. You not only had Peter Shilton in goal, but in defence for Southampton that day, you had Ruben Agboola and a player who I always liked, actually. You had Danny Wallace up front. I always liked. So I always thought he was a good player. Went to Manchester United in the end, didn't he? But just in terms of expectation that season, just because of what happened, Kelvin, just because, again, I was looking the next 8 games. After that, we won 1, but we also only lost 2 games against Chelsea and Forest. So it seems like that season could have went in either direction with the amount of draws that we had in those first 10 or whatever games.
I mean, it felt, I don't know whether this is a hindsight thing, Chris. It was certainly an exciting start, but when I think about that, looking back on it, it felt like the previous 2, possibly 3 seasons, it felt. We weren't that far away. We just needed a little bit more investment. We needed to be patient, all these commodities that we're missing primarily from a chairman, and the board not able to invest good sums of money, that we're going to net you a good goal scorer would have, somebody that was going to get you 20 goals a season in that team would have definitely made a difference, I think. So it was a good start, but it had a familiar feel to it 10 games in. I think Ashurst made were harder to beat initially. But some of the football, I can't remember what game it was. We took a bit of a tonking, and he made when we came back. I remember the next game after that, thinking, "Whoa, he's tightened. We're right up here. We're not. Benno's not charging forward at the drop of a hat now. He's obviously been told to stay in his position. Not that you could put all the goals that were conceded down to Benno, but definitely not. No, it was an exciting start for sure.
Yeah, and then we'll get into it, but I'll get into it a bit more. But talking about lack of investment potentially, we move on to 1990. And I want to come back onto this because there's another one at the start of that season further on in the dates. Because on the 25th of August in 1990, we had former England striker Peter Davenport scoring on his debut when we were beaten 3-2 at Norwich City on the opening day of the season when we got promoted after that. I'll say epic semi-final against Newcastle in the playoffs. I won't mention the final, of course, and how we ended up going up. But it also proved to be John McPhail's final game for Sunderland and his only top-flight appearance in a career of almost 600 league appearances. And I want to get into that in further down the line because the next game is in the days to follow. So we'll come back onto that. But we can't really do the 25th of August the first time around without mentioning what happened in 1999. Sunderland recorded their first away win of the season, which was significant enough because we'd just been promoted to the Premier League after our record title-winning season of getting 105 points in Division 1, as it was back then. I want to say Ensley Division 1. Would I be right? No.
And when we won it in 96, it was Ensley. I think we the nationwide.
Oh, look at Andrew's on the ball. You're right. I remember when the players were celebrating, they had they gave them the nationwide flags and banners and things.
Yes.
But yes, so we went up and our first away win of the season came at St. James's Park. And it also turned out, probably unsurprisingly considering what happened, to be Ruud Gullit's final game in charge of Newcastle. But the memories around this, because just very quickly in terms of that season, we started off obviously with that, and everyone goes back to that game at Stamford Bridge, got absolutely torn apart and learnt a few lessons. But then we had a good one in the midweek after that. We had a good one to start with at the Stadium of Light. We came back and played Watford. And I remember Stefan Schwarz being unbelievable in that game. Just he blew me away that night, first time seeing him in the flesh. Then we had a really good 0-0 home draw against Arsenal, and then we got beat at Leeds. So it wasn't a spectacular start to that season, but it was solid. It was about as good as we probably could have expected, because didn't really expect anything at Chelsea. Probably thought, let's get 3 points against Watford. Arsenal, let's try and get at least a point. Got that. Leeds, okay, let's go and see what we can get, and not really expect much. But this is the one, if you look at this fixture, we then played Newcastle, who, Ruud Gullit, I remember when he was appointed, there was all the sexy football signs, homemade signs, and all this sort of stuff. And Newcastle fans were loving the appointment. They thought he was going to do the job there. And actually, I have to admit, at the time, feeling a little bit worried he was going to kind of take them places. And then we went there with that side, and I'll just go through the Sunderland side. Sorensen in goal, Chris Macon at right back, Mickey Gray at left back, Steve Bold and Paul Butler in the middle of defence, Nicky Summerby out on the right, centre midfielder Gavin McCann and Alex Ray. And then on the left, in his little kind of inverted kind of left-hand side position where he came in centrally, it was Stefan Schwarz, and obviously we had Quinn and Phillips up front. Interestingly for this game, and it's something you don't really think about, but we had, just looking at the subs bench, actually, we had Andy Marriott as the keeper sub, but then we had Thomas Helmer. Didn't realise he was on the bench that day, because there was obviously rumours about what had happened at Chelsea. Kevin Ball was on the bench for this game, which is quite interesting when you think back. He came on with about 20 minutes to go, which we might touch on, I imagine. And then we had John Oster and Danny Didio, as my dad used to like to call him. But obviously, just talking about team news, the big news of the night was, of course, that Ruud Gullit had left Duncan Ferguson. I nearly said Duncan Shearer there, former Swindon striker. I nearly combined the two strikers there. He had Duncan Ferguson and Alan Shearer on the bench, and up front he had, because he kind of quite a few people who I knew him, so it was possibly the biggest Sunderland fan you could ever meet, up front in Paul Robinson. And he started the game, and there was young player, I think Jamie McLean as well. He was a young player who played for Newcastle as well, and he was in the side ahead of the likes of Ferguson and Shearer. And they had Tommy Wright in goal as well, who played for a long time. I think was coming to the end of his career. But this was in the rain. It was teeming down. I remember I went to the Beanback. I wasn't lucky enough to go there to the actual game, but I remember being at the Beanback. And I remember, we can go through the game in a minute, but I remember racing back to watch it again on Match of the Day that night. And I remember all up Newcastle Road, and it happened about 3 or 4 times at least. It was absolutely hosing it down. But there was these elderly women with their doors open in Newcastle Road. Just everyone was chanting and everything like this, but they were just in their doorway, just going, get in, just shouting, just screaming anything, just to be part of it. And you were shouting back at them, and it was just that sort of atmosphere. And it was absolutely brilliant. But Kelvin, sorry, I might be mistaken, but did you say you were actually there that night?
No, I wasn't.
Okay.
It was the following one. Sorry.
Right, okay.
It was the following one. I think I've said to you before, living away, I usually relied on, I saw an awful lot of derby games at St. James's from the Newcastle end of the ground. I was very rarely in the Sunderland end, and my contact let me down badly for that game. So I think did they not have some kind of issues with, weren't they doing something with their ground as well that night? I have a feeling they had some of their, part of their ground was...
wasn't the Sunderland fans in the end without the roof on?
Yeah. What used to be the Leazer's end, yeah. Aye.
I'm pretty sure the headlines were singing in the rain, because the away allocation was vastly reduced. But Chris, the same time you were walking up Newcastle Road, I was doing the same along Fulwell Road, and it was pretty much the same scene on Fulwell Road. We were, I don't know if you were heading home, Chris, or what. We were all off to was it the Flying? I think it was still known as the Flying Boat then on Sea Road. We were all off to the Flying Boat, and of course it had Match of the Day on, so everybody was watching the game again, and it was a brilliant atmosphere. People on Fulwell Road were like, you know, when you see in films, people are beeping their horns and leaning out of their cars and all of this. That was what was happening. Because that win, Chris, kind of it bookended the 90s for us, because, as you said, we beat them in the playoffs right at the start of the 1990s. I don't think we beat them again for the rest of the decade. And the Newcastle in the 90s were all this rubbish about the entertainers and everybody's second club and all of that. And yet for a long time in the decade, there was fears that Sunderland were getting left behind. But come the end of the 1990s, we've moved to the stadium, we've had the big promotion, everybody's talking about us, and we were now back in the Premier League, and we were showing, the North East isn't just all about the Mags. There's another team here, and we're prepared to go toe-to-toe with them. So there was this real sense on the night after the game coming away from the Beanback. And I mean, Beanback, we're talking, there must have been 20-odd thousand there, Chris. It was heaving. It wasn't, one of these where we're all just shoehorned into like a tiny bar with a screen. I think, didn't they put the big screens on the pitch, if I remember rightly, for that one?
Yeah, because they'd done the same at Roker Park, hadn't they, when the away fans were banned. And that was the first time they'd done it. And then they did it again for this one, even though we had away fans there. They still did it for this game, which is crazy to think about it now. Actually, that they put a big screen in the middle of the pitch.
Yeah.
And from memory, we were all in the West Stand. From memory,
I think at that time, Chris, I think they might have had big screens facing both because I seem to think I was in the East Stand.
You might be
but
right.
I could be. I might be mixing the games up now. I mean, it's sad to say it was a long time ago now.
That's it. Before this, you were saying, that was the one, that was Shearer's penalty save. The problem is with this, Andrew, we win so often there,
Chris.
but it's hard to distinguish. It's hard to distinguish.
It's hard, isn't it?
I mean, was it that 3-0? Was that 2-1? I mean, we you get confused because we won so many times there recently. But just thinking about and actually I popped into the Grange. That's why I was heading up to Newcastle.
Fair enough.
But just in terms of the game itself, which is even more impressive when you think back, that just before the half-hour mark, and I remember even before the game, the pressure was on, because I remember the cameras really going in kind of with a close-up on Ruud Gullit with Ferguson and Shearer behind him, and Shearer was giving him the daggers behind, and you kind of knew what was happening there. But the pressure was on beforehand. But having said that, just before the half hour, and actually I think from memory, again, I haven't seen the goals in preparation for this, unfortunately, but I'm fairly certain it was Paul Robinson who actually slipped Kieran Dyer through. It might not have been, I might be mistaken, but I'm sure he had some sort of involvement in the goal. But Kieran Dyer put them ahead just before the half hour. And Kelvin, when you think about it, a newly promoted side who's getting off to a solid start and you away from home, but you look at the characters in that team, Kelvin, and I mean that would you look at your Steve Bull, your Alex Reyes, your Niall Quinns, your Stefan Schwartz, your Chris Makins, your Paul Butler's at the back. I mean, it was never over, was it?
I mean, the elements, the going a goal down, the elements, the home crowd there, I mean, the crowd were having gotten over the shock of Shearer not being on the pitch. My memory of that, watching the highlights on the telly, was that their crowd got going a bit, with it, and I'm thinking, ooh, what's going to happen here? Are we in for another Tonkin? But no, we definitely turned it around. We had some gritty boys in our team then. When you think Alex Ray, Schwartz, I know he was a sulky player, but he was he was a hard, disciplined player when he played. He was clever as well. So I think we had the goods. We obviously did because we won the game, but I didn't. It didn't last very long, that feeling that we were maybe going to get beat. I remember coming into half time thinking, we're going to be all right here. We're going to, we'll come back in this game. And for having said that about Ray and Schwartz and Bold, Niall Quinn was never found wanting in them games. He wasn't a big soft pudding, Niall Quinn, was he? He could put his arms and feet and body on the line. He wasn't averse to getting stuck in.
Of course, Kelvin. He was the one who, talking about getting stuck in, wildly lashed out in the penalty area to set up the whole Shearer scenario on penalty, wasn't it? the year later.
Well, there's an old cliche about keeping centre forwards out of your own centre forwards out of your penalty area. He's certainly, if you did a top 10 of why you should do that, that probably would be number one.
Why no, Kelvin? It worked out a treat. It gave us one of our famous, our most memorable moments at St. James's. So he knew what he was doing all along.
The best tackle Niall Quinn ever made, that one. But I mean, just Andrew, in terms of getting back into it, I mean, actually, one thing you almost forget of this game, but there's two things I want to mention here. Firstly, the conditions, because I remember at one point the ball didn't look exactly like it was rolling like it should. And I wonder if in the modern game they might just call it a day because the health and safety and all this sort of stuff. You're talking over a quarter of a century ago now with this game. But the other thing I want to talk about in terms of on top of the conditions, because they had a little bit of a part to play in the goals, is the quality of the two goals, with Niall Quinn equalising just after the hour, and then we're 15 minutes to go. Kevin Phillips putting us ahead. But I mean, sometimes it does forgetting in a game like this how good those goals were.
They were amazing goals, and I mean, I'd love to see the XG of that Phillips one, because the ball looks as if it's rolling out by the byline, and he turns on it and somehow manages to do this curl lob type of thing. You could take that shot 100 times and maybe score once or twice. But we had that as a team. We had the quality, but as you mentioned, Kelvin, we had that little bit of grit. And I wonder if on the night that made the difference. I seem to think Newcastle under Ruud Gullit were known for being a bit soft, shall we say. The conditions perhaps maybe put them off. But yeah, brilliant goals, Chris. We're talking about Paul Robinson there, and seeing as we've already rattled off a couple of Fulwell's fine hostilleries, I'll give a name check to the Bluebell and Windmills from back then, because I seem to think Paul Robinson and all of his mates used to drink in those pods. In those pods? They drank in those pods and listened to these pods. Robinson, if I remember rightly, went to Monk Wearmouth alongside your good self, Chris, and me. Yep. And so did David Bruce, our current chief operating officer. So I think that just proves that Monk Wearmouth produced the best and the biggest Sunderland fans. There's no debates there from any.
Yeah. They would have been in about the same year, actually, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think they were both in the year above myself, so a couple of years above you, if I've got my timelines right. And yeah, as I say, Monk Wearmouth was Martin Smith went there as well. So the school has turned out some good fellas. I'm looking at one right now, Chris. So there's a compliment for Monk Wearmouth. But it was a memorable night with lots of stories. You're talking about the rain there. I think it's quite ironic because we'd lost to them in the rain, I think, under Butcher, and Sunderland had said the game should have been called off. Well, of course,
Scott Sellers' free kick that day, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, that was a game on time tees, maybe, if I've got me
Yeah.
got it all.
Well, of course it was. All of our defeats are on TNT.
Well, yes, yeah. But we must have been on every week then. But yeah, I remember after this game, of course, we won. So it was Newcastle's turn to complain that the game should have been called off. But the weather was bad. I seem to remember a couple of the radio commentary teams had to go off air because water was getting into their equipment.
Yeah.
You know, St. James's was under redevelopment, so sections of the roof was missing. It was quite it was biblical proportions, that rain.
It must have been at the Gallagher end of the ground then, because that slope is quite bad, you know.
Well, if it wasn't the rain, it was the Newcastle fans' tears getting into the equipment. But it was just a night of all of these like quite seismic moments. And of course, for Hullett, I don't know if it was a power play or he was trying to like establish who was boss, but him benching those two players was just it was massive. And am I right in thinking that pretty much led to his departure in the long run? I can't remember.
Well, that was this was his last game. This was his last game in charge. But Kelvin, just to bring you quickly in on those goals, because actually, if you look, you know, you talk about the decision to put Ferguson and Shearer on the bench, but when Duncan Ferguson came on 57 minutes, it was 1-0 to Newcastle. And then when Alan Shearer came on the pitch on 72 minutes, it was 1-1. So actually, if you just look at how the goals went in and when they came on, you could argue that they had a negative impact on the game. But again, just to talk about those goals, Kelvin, because I you know, you just think that cross from Mickey Gray that he dug out to the back post and Quinn headed in, and I mentioned Tommy Wright earlier because I always remember Tommy Wright almost coming out thinking I've blocked all the angles here with Kevin Phillips, and Kevin Phillips just almost fell back and just looped it over him into the far corner. It was an unbelievable goal.
He just had that. He scored a lot of goals like that, Phillips, where you would think he'll need to pass that. He's going to lose it. You know, the shot's not on, and then it's in the back of the net, and you think, how the bloody hell did he do that? One of the things I always felt about him, a bit like, and I am going to make a comparison with Maradona here. Okay, his arse is so close to the ground. Those players who are built like that have this ability to you know, make the ball do stuff that you long backs, you know, would struggle to do, you know. So it was a spanking goal, wasn't it, on the night? But he would just try things like that, Phillips. That's what I liked about him. If you don't shoot, you don't score, and he definitely had that in him, didn't he? That kind of confidence to just have a pop, you know. It was a cracking goal. But just as well, I forgot to mention Gavin McCann before as well, you know, when we're talking about boys being able to dig in and with a hard edge. He wasn't a soft laddie either, McCann, was he? He could put his foot in, and I thought we got the tactics right. When you're saying about Gray coming down that wing and putting that cross in, there was a bit more grass down that side, as I remember. It wasn't as patchy, and you know, they were setting him away into space on quite a number of occasions. I'm trying to remember who the Newcastle defender was that was marking him.
It was Warren Barton on that side.
Right. Yeah. I mean, once Gray started going down there, once we started doing that, he looked like he just wasn't managing. And he was a good player, Warren Barton. You know, there was nothing wrong with him as a fullback, but he definitely pulled the Newcastle defence to bits. That tactic of going down there. Schwartz had a part to play in that. He was really clever with the ball, Schwartz. There wasn't always you know, a big fanfare, a lot of fuss, defence splitting passes, stuff like that. He just kept the game simple, and he kept playing plane grey into space, with the knowledge that he was there behind him if anything broke down. He was good like that. You know, when Kevin Ball came on in that game, who did he come on for? I'm trying to remember that.
So he replaced Alex Ray with about 20 minutes to go. Now, I was going to ask you lads, because I was just trying to find out there. Am I confusing victories at St James's Park? Was this the one where Kevin Ball hit his own crossbar with a tackle?
I think Kevin Ball was actually brought on by Newcastle because he was their most threatening player. You were talking about bringing Ferguson on and Shearer on. Kevin Ball went nearest to scoring for the Mags than any of their own players. I mean, we joke about the Niall Quinn penalty that he gave away at the same end the following season. I mean, the Kevin Ball moment, it's one of them we laugh about now, but if that had dipped under the bar, Kevin Ball's position as a Sunderland legend just meant that the Newcastle fans would have been all over that. They would have been cock a hoop if that had got in. But as it was, it cannoned off the bar, and we can all have a good old laugh about it now, all these years later. And Bally, I think if you asked him, he'd probably say he knew what he was doing all along.
I can't remember which player it was, but there's a good interview with a player who said he was standing behind it. It might have been Quinny, I can't remember, but someone was standing right behind it. And but they were talking to Kevin Ball as it was in the air, and they went, "Fuck, Bally, that's in."
It was an attempted slide tackle, wasn't it? I think he was going in to win the ball, and the weather was that bad that he's ended up like winning the tackle, but the ball has just ricocheted up into the air, and
well, goes without saying
it'd
that
have been a cracking shot if he'd been going in the right direction. It would have been a cracking shot.
But yeah, absolutely brilliant. And then actually just in terms of the impact of that, and I'm just trying to look, because that was on of course, the date we're talking about, which is the 25th of August, but we weren't beaten again in the league until the 20th of November, when we played Liverpool. So we went on a huge unbeaten run, and that actually, by the time we got beat off Liverpool, we were in 4th place. So it was almost that victory kind of propelled us into that run of form and kind of seen us have the season we had. So happy days. That's a good one to cover. So that was on the 25th of August. The last one as well on the 25th of August, and I'm going to put this as a little bit of a quiz question. You might know the answer, but in 2015, on the 25th of August, Lyndon Gooch made his debut in what turned out to be a record-breaking win at the Stadium of Light. Can anyone remember why? It was 6-3. And, yeah, I haven't got the goal scorers in front of me. But I'll tell you what, let's I think someone mentioned that because it was in with his goal scoring stats. Yeah, so Jack Rodwell scored. Yeah, Rodwell got the opener.
Got 2.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, 4 got a hat trick, and what more?
That's it. Yeah,
Chris, that could have been the quiz question itself. Jack Rodwell scoring.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
twice.
It was 3s each at half time.
Yeah, and then we got 3 in the second half. Yeah, and we put out a good side. Looking at it, Dick Advocat. I think he was desperate for a win at the time. That was our first win of the season, funnily enough. You'll be surprised to hear, because we didn't actually win in the league until we beat Newcastle United 3-0.
Come on,
which was Dick, which was of course by the time Sam Allardyce took over. So that was in 2015. So let's move on to the 26th of August. We start with 1914. Which was a big day because on the 26th of August 1914, Alan Brown was born in Corbridge, obviously the man who managed Sunderland on 2 separate occasions, 1957 to 1964 and 1968 to 1972. And we've talked about him quite a lot already on this podcast. We'll go to 1939 on August the 26th. Sunderland opened the season with a 3-0 home victory over Derby County. But this was added to 2 more games that we played that season because they were all removed from the record books when World War II began and the league season was abandoned. But we'll come on to a little bit more of that further down the line. We'll go on to 1981, where Scottish striker Ali McCoist, he was signed from St Johnstone for just over 350,000, and he was signed. But it said the fee was not fully paid as he moved to Glasgow Rangers after only 2 seasons. Because we might not have actually paid the full money, Kelvin.
I think that was one of the reasons why he went. I think there was some kind of number of games. I can't remember exactly what they were, and this was something that wasn't apparent to the ordinary fan at the time. It's just when you look back on these things, I'm sure there was he needs to play X number of games and we'll pay you the next instalment of the fee, and I think they decided that they weren't going to do that. I don't know why, but I don't think he'd scored the goals that they'd hoped he would have scored. But I have to say, he always looked like a player to me and to a lot of other fans. But he was just a young lad. He was a part-time player when he came to us. He wasn't a full-time professional. He was a lad that needed a little bit of time and a little bit of nurturing. I felt he certainly showed at Rangers that would made a mistake. I think so. I would have hung on to him if it had been my decision.
Yeah.
But what if that one? What if?
I think, Kelvin, Alan Durbin was of a similar mindset to you. He didn't particularly want McCoist to go. He could see the potential in him, but there was that financial issue, like you say. We were perhaps due to pay another instalment, but as well, he was a player that we could get money in for. And Durbin, that was his only route to strengthening the squad. You know, he'd have to take that backward step of selling McCoist against his own judgment.
Yeah.
Because he could use those funds to strengthen a couple of other areas. I don't think that was his. It was a case of McCoist failing at Sunderland. I think it was the circumstances led to him having to go. And I think if I remember rightly, didn't McCoist have a season ticket at the stadium for a long time afterwards? I think he enjoyed his period at Sunderland. He doesn't look upon it as negatively.
I think he married a Sunderland girl, didn't he? He was he was never short of mentioning her over the years. And always when he went up to the various friendlies, if he was there, he was always across and waving at the fans, even when he was playing for Rangers. He was. I think he looks back on his time with us with a degree of fondness there.
Yeah, well, yeah, and he has been linked with the manager's job a couple of times. To be fair, hasn't he? He's nearly come back on a couple of occasions. But I think you might touch on him more from 1982, Andrew. So we'll park that for a second, because also on the 26th of August, and I want to touch on this one actually because I've wrote about this game and I think it was potentially a pivotal kind of game in a strange sort of way in 1986 on August the 26th because it's the League Cup game at the beginning of the season. So we'd kicked off Laurie McMenemy's second season in charge, which was it his third season in charge potentially? In 586, no, there was his. I can't remember. It was his last season in charge anyway. Let's put it that way. Because at the start of that season, we kicked off against Mick Buxton's Huddersfield Town in Division 2. And our second game was a League Cup tie at Roker Park, and it was against Dennis Smith's York City. And they came that evening. There was only 9,000 who turned up to the game, which is probably typical for a League Cup game at the start of the season, where the crowds kind of dip. But that night, Dennis Smith's York City side were kind of renowned giant killers. They had big games against Liverpool, big games against Arsenal in the past, and he'd done a cracking job. And a little bit of trivia that Dennis Smith, I think, always likes to mention when it comes to his York City side. But they were the first side to break the 100-point barrier, and he's always kind of proud of that. And yeah, so they were a renowned cup side, and they came to Roker Park. So it was Dennis Smith York City against Lorient Sunderland, and essentially they tore us a new one. And it was Tony Canham who was flying that night. Dennis Smith found plying his trade for part-time Harrogate Railway, which was the typical Dennis Smith signing. Saw him playing for Harrogate Railway, pulled him in, and that night he tore us apart. And on the end of all of this was Keith Walwyn, a 25-year-old striker at the time, and he was a proper old-fashioned centre-forward, big, powerful, and he got 29 goals the previous year in Division 3, but it was Canham doing everything, and he gave poor George Burley a horrid night at Roker Park. And can you name the other Sunderland? There was 2 Sunderland links in Dennis Smith's side that night. Not sure if you can name them. One was a coach and a manager, and the other one a cracking striker.
I want to say Kevin Ball. Didn't he play alongside Cannon and Ball? Didn't they?
Hey, easy, Tiger, easy.
Thought you were being serious for a second there.
Chris was worried there, thinking Kevin Ball played for York. What's he on about?
Have I asked the right question?
Viv Busby. It wasn't Viv Busby, was it?
Viv Busby had packed it in. So at the back that night was Ricky Sprazier in the York City side. And the other link who came on as substitute that night was a certain Marco Gabardini. And actually, he was so young, I think, at that night, he actually came on right wing, I think, because Walwyn was left up front. But Walwyn was fantastic, and I was just looking at, and actually, I think that night, and I'm just kind of double checking, but I think we had Dave Buchanan, who was in that side, and he scored Sunderland's first when we were 3-0 down after 51 minutes. Then Eric Gates pulled it back to 3-2, and Keith Walwyn scored in the last few minutes to make it 4. But in terms of that, I think it was one of these things that I think it always stuck in Bob Murray's mind how good Dennis Smith's side were on that night. But obviously he was doing a cracking job at York. But I think this probably shoved Dennis Smith onto his radar for what then happened at the season. And then if you go to the summer, he went to York and pulled Dennis Smith and Viv Busby. And after the game, he said, and I'm just looking at Dennis Smith's quotes after the game, he said, "We play every game like that. We always attack away from home. Sunderland have an awful lot of potential, and obviously the tie is not over yet. The North East is a breeding ground for good centre forwards, and the crowd certainly saw one tonight in Keith Walwyn." Now, I just wanted to put it to you, Kelvin, actually, that it was the type of thing that he did because he went back to get Marco Gabardini. But you do wonder that actually because Keith Walwyn was his main man in that season, why you can imagine him going, why he didn't go back for him when he got the Sunderland job.
I have no idea. I'd totally lost track of Walwyn. Of course, as soon as you mention him, I think, I can remember that guy. Yeah, he was a good player.
He left to go to Blackpool that summer, didn't he?
Right.
So he, the tribunal set the fee at 35,000. So what I actually think probably happened is the tribunal probably priced us out the market.
Very possibly. It's
If
interesting,
you
Chris.
think of us.
Sorry, Chris. Just a side point there. It's quite interesting, like you say, kind of Bob Murray has spotted Dennis Smith and the way he likes to do things, and it's perhaps stuck in the back of his mind. That's twice in a row that's happened in this period. This week we're talking about in that, like, the current Sunderland manager has come up against his successor. So, you know, we discussed the Southampton game where it was Ashurst against McMenemy. Then fast forward it a year, and you've got McMenemy coming up against Smith. So it just an interesting little thing about how people come on Sunderland's radar perhaps earlier than you remember them to have done.
And the rate at which they were coming and going as well, which was part of the problem at that time. Yeah. You could be a manager with a hell of a lot of potential, but you know, you don't get a lot of time at Sunderland, do you? Although Dennis Smith, you know, he did come in. He got a couple of, he got a good few years, didn't he? Before he.
We'll come back on to Dennis Smith because we're going to go back to 1990 in the next game that we cover from that season. So we'll move on at this point, because I do go back to that game. I genuinely think that was a bit of a pivotal game. I think Bob Murray, that lodged in Bob Murray's mind for the next summer. But we move on to again August the 26th, still 2001. Kevin Phillips scored to ensure that Sunderland stretched their unbeaten run of Premiership games at Newcastle United to 4 games with a 1-1 draw, which was unfortunately Don Hutchinson's final appearance in red and white stripes, because then he left for West Ham. I think it was 4 days later he signed for West Ham. And then in 2004, we go on to an unbelievable signing that Mick McCarthy made when Christian Basila signed from Strasbourg, and we all got excited, you know, alongside the Latalacs of the world and Kelvin Davis and Alan Stubbs. We thought we were world beaters, and, you know, nothing would stop us after those signings. So let's leave 2004 very quickly behind on the August 26th and move on to August the 27th, because I want to just very quickly touch on with you, Kelvin, in 1942, in August the 27th, quite a young age as well. Unfortunately, it was unfortunately the passing of former England forward and Sunderland's fourth highest goal scorer, George Holley, only aged 56. Kelvin,
great goal scorer for Sunderland. For people that don't know much about him, same boy as well, wasn't he? There was he preceded another same goal scorer in Gary Rowell there. So 315 games, 157 goals. What a player. He formed a great partnership with Arthur Bridget down Sunderland's left-hand side. And they both played for England. I think Bridget was already an England international, and Holley and him played 4 games together and sort of passed each other. Holley played, I think, 10 games in all for England and scored 8 goals. He's a cracking goal scorer. He was top goal scorer in 5 separate seasons. His goal haul includes 9 hat-tricks. And he's 4th on the list of all-time goal scorers, behind Bobby Gurney, Charlie Buchan, and Dave Halliday, who's gonna come up as well. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Those 2 Seaham lads that scored goals for us. They're both mag slayers as well, aren't they? They both scored hat-tricks against the Mags, and Holley scored in that 9-1 Tonkin that we gave Newcastle down at St James in 1908. So he's one of our top goal scorers, rightly placed in the legend category, this lad. I would have loved reading about him and reading up about him I would have loved to have seen this lad play. I think he seems to have been a fantastic player. He did die quite young, and I always remember reading this. I think I included this in an On This Day piece that I did on him. You know, Charlie Buchan wrote about him in his autobiography, and this is what he said. I've got this here. Several times I stood spellbound on the field of play, watching Holly bewilder the opposition. After one game, manager Bob Kerr said to me as I went to draw my weekly wage packet, "Do you think you have earned it?" "No," I replied, "but I think George has earned it for us all." There was another occasion when I scored 5 goals against Kenneth Campbell, the Scottish international goalkeeper playing for Liverpool. 4 of these I just touched into the net. Holly had beaten the defence and even drawn Campbell out of position before giving me the goals on a plate. He just sounds to have been a fantastic player in that regard. Went off to Brighton, played, I think, a season there. Another lad who the First World War kind of cut across his career a bit, and he was great friends with L.R. Roos. He was great friends with him, and who some people will know lost his life in the First World War, and that apparently affected him quite a bit. But he did come back and play for us. Rightly takes his place as one of our goal-scoring legends, I think, George Holly.
Kelvin, they're just quite apt, really, because we've been talking about famous wins against Newcastle, and you've used the phrase "Mag Slayer." There's something in my mind saying George Holly has the record for most Sunderland goals against Newcastle.
Oh, right.
Either of you two? I'm pretty confident. I'm pretty sure he scored across league and cup. I think he got more than 10 goals against Newcastle, and that means he's our best marksman against the man.
Yeah.
And not bad for a lad from Seaham. I'm sure that meant a lot to him, you know, as it did to the fans as well.
Well, we've got that many players who like to bung them in against Newcastle. It's hard to keep track on who the latest top scorer is, really, isn't it? But just quickly as well, just the last point on George Holly, and I think we might have touched on this. I think we probably have when we went back to that cup final where we could have potentially done the double, and we potentially lost out because George Holly was all bandaged up for that game. And we kind of rolled him out and tried to play him.
Bob Kerr took a risk, didn't he, putting him on the pitch, and it was a risk that didn't work out. I think that probably sits with Kerr, doesn't it, rather than Holly.
I think, to be fair to Kyle and Holly, another player was going to play, and he got he had an attack of nerves because of the big attendance, Kelvin.
Oh, right, yeah.
I think Holly said, "Oh, listen, lads, I'm knackered, for want of a better word." My mum doesn't like us saying the word knackered, so he's not listening. But he was knackered, and he said, "Well, listen, I think the lad was called Walter Tinsley." And he then, the following week, he recovered and he played in a game where we won the league title. But the cup final, he couldn't play. And to be fair to Holly, he said, "Listen, I'm no good here, but strap us up and I'll just come out on the pitch and do as best I can, just so that we're not starting the game with 10 men." But to be fair to him, he was almost a passenger in that game.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's how I remember it.
Yeah. I think I have actually read that now. Did you write about that, Andrew?
He can never remember.
I've
You
got
know,
a
yeah.
I've got a feeling that I did actually. Yeah. Different days though. Yeah, you've got 11 players in your dressing room, and one of them says, "I'm too nervous to play," and you're looking round thinking, "Ooh."
Aye.
Somebody go out there and see who's standing around and wants a game,
It speaks to George Holly, though, to be fair, that he was prepared to do it whilst injured. Obviously,
Yeah.
as well
Fair
as being
play.
a talented player, he was a team player, so fair play
Yeah.
to him.
Yeah.
That's it. So that's George Holly, and I'm sure it's not the first time we're going to hear about George Holly either. And then we'll go on to another legend. 1949, on the 27th of August, Glenn Shackleton scored 2 as Sunderland beat Arsenal at Roker Park. Apologies. And just very quickly on that, because we have this A. Smithson who writes about these things on the on the website. Just to read something about that day with Len Shackleton scoring against Arsenal, because it said Andrew wrote the Bradford youngster had signed amateur forms at Highbury in 1938, but after subsequently being released shortly before the Second World War, he was always keen to remind them of what they had missed out on. His sense of unfinished business was well known, and the extra motivation to do well against Arsenal usually enticed a few extra numbers on the gate, with this particular date against the Londoners being no different. It was later reported in the press that crowds had started gathering outside the turnstiles from noon onwards for Sunderland's first home game of the season, and that was despite the ominously dark clouds gathering overhead. But he did seem like one of those players, Andrew, that if a team had, because he obviously had that famous I'm not bothered about, I don't care about, I'm not biased against Newcastle. I don't care who beats them. But once he had something against a side, that was it for him, wasn't it?
Exactly. This episode does seem to have a theme of mag slayers.
It does.
You're right. Shackleton, yeah, which is always going to go down well with most of our listeners, I'm sure. But yeah, he did. If he felt there was any sort of slight against him, he would hold that close to his heart and raise his game. Arsenal and Newcastle being the two teams that he did that the most. I think some of his best performances were against Arsenal. He was able to really lift it up a level. And that's perhaps the frustration with certain players, the more maverick type of player, in that they can do these unbelievable things in one game and absolutely demolish a team single-handedly. And then the next week, that same level's not quite there. I can't believe this now sounds like I'm having a pop at Len Shackleton. I'm really not. I'm not trying to make myself unpopular. But that type of player did have that ability on certain days to just be a one-man band almost and absolutely demolish sides. And fans knew that. As Chris has read out there, Shackleton, if it was a big game, it was a big date, and it was against somebody that Shackleton had history with, you knew you were in for a treat. He was going to be pulling out all of the stops. And almost not necessarily because victory was the aim. That was a byproduct almost of him just wanting to belittle certain players and embarrass them with his skills. He would often try and do a trick where it was to humiliate somebody.
It was a bugger that when his grouch was with one of his own players, though.
Yes, very true. Yeah,
apparently he used to send passes to Trevor Ford and make them spin back on him to try and make him look stupid, allegedly.
Yeah. I remember my dad saying that.
Yeah, it's again, it's a bit like the Quinn and the ball instances against the Mags. We all laugh about that now and think, oh, very good. That just shows the quality he had. I wonder if somebody tried doing that now in the team, would the fans start getting on his back and start saying, oh, well, man, you we want to win as a team here. You can't be trying to do over your teammates and make them look bad, because that impacts our chances of of a result. Although, again, I realise as these words are coming out, Chris, it sounds like I'm having a character assassination of Shackleton. So please stop me.
No,
please step in
well,
and move on.
let's put a line on it, because just to finish off, that day was a 4-2 victory over Arsenal on the 27th of August 1949. And Len Shackleton got a brace, Evan Broadus and Tommy Wright scored the other goals. But actually, it was Tommy Reynolds who Argus singled out for praise in the football leg, or according to A. Smithson, of course, who are reliable on this day, right, Andrew?
A. Smithson, who likes to attack sacred cows like Shackleton. And I said earlier, me mum will be unhappy at us saying the word knackered. me granddad, bless him, who has long since passed, he wouldn't be very impressed because Shackleton was his favourite player. And a bit like your dad, Chris, he had some lovely stories about Shackleton. He was very fortunate to meet them a couple of times. So yes, I've managed to upset Len Shackleton and his fans, and I've also upset two blood relatives. So I'm doing well today, lads.
Well, that's it. Only halfway in. Let's move on to 1958 on the 27th of August. Right winger Clive Bircham scored Sunderland's first ever home league goal outside of the top flight of English football in a 2-1 defeat by Fulham. Moving on to 1983, it was an opening day draw at Norwich City. Keith Burton scored for Norwich City. For us, Paul Bracewell made his first debut for Sunderland that day in 1983. So I would have been about a month old when Paul Bracewell made his first debut for Sunderland. And Paul Atkinson was the other player who made his debut that day. So we move on to 1988. Sunderland started the league season with a 1-1 draw in our first ever game against Bournemouth. Surprisingly enough, it was the only opening game of the season. It was the only opening game in the 1980s where Sunderland did not have a player making their debut. Which said a lot actually about we'll come on to Dennis Smith about the job he had to do and bring players through from the youth, but we'll move on because we talked about Paul Bracewell making his first debut in 1983. We move on to 1989, and Paul Bracewell made his second debut for Sunderland when he came back. So it was 6 years later. And actually, I think in that 1983, we realised how good Paul Bracewell was, and he moved on to Everton, who were one of the top sides in the country, and the next season almost completed the treble in his first season. I think he played over 60 games as well in his first season for Everton that season. Incredible number of games. But he had those injury problems where I think it was Billy Whitehurst crippled him at St James's Park, and he could never really get back with that ankle problem that he had. And the story was, we did a podcast with him a while back, and the story was that because he knew Dennis Smith and he needed games, and he said he only had 50% movement in one of his ankles, but he wanted to keep playing. He phoned his old mate Dennis Smith, and because he knew Sunderland and his mate was manager, he said, "Can I come back? Can I to play some games?" So initially he came in on loan, and his second debut, like I said, was against Middlesbrough, which is a big game. And I think Bernie Slaven scored the opener for them, and we came back from behind. Gary Bennett and Colin Pascoe scored. And if I remember rightly, Colin Pascoe was unbelievable that day. I think it was one of his best games in a red and white shirt. Alongside, I remember he was fantastic at Spurs as well the following season. I think it was a 3-3 draw, and he was fantastic then as well. But moving on, 1994, Sunderland win 1-0 against Stoke City at the Victoria Ground. And it's really bizarre because I think that season, and I'll just quickly have a look because I think we won. I think that might have been the only game that we won, but I think if you look, we went on a really long unbeaten run because it was Mick Buxton. And I think we won 2 or something in the first. We started the season unbeaten in the first 8 games, but won 2 of those. So we had 6 draws, which basically I think summed up Mick Buxton. And we were very solid, but struggled to win games. And then it kind of went downhill from there and ended up, of course, with with Peter Reid taking over. So we move on to 2005 on August the 27th. Sunderland conceded their fastest ever penalty after 12 seconds of the match at Wigan Athletic. And then Jason Roberts scored and converted that spot kick. Moving on to the 28th of August, and we start with 1963, where we beat Portsmouth 3-0 with George Mulhall scoring twice and Johnny Crossan scoring the third. But let's move on to 1982, because we already touched on this in the quiz, and we've touched on one or two of the players. We've even had a song about one of them, because we move on to 1982 on August the 28th. And again, we mentioned in the quiz that Sunderland become the champions of Europe after a game at Villa Park. And I'll let you tell us all about it, Andrew.
Yeah, cheers, Chris. Sounds nice, that, doesn't it? Sunderland, champions of Europe. We can, well,
it's like Scotland, world champions in '66. It was the same thing, wasn't it?
Well, exactly.
Kelvin can tell us all about that.
I'm with you on. Yeah, Aston Villa had just won the European Cup as it was then, and funnily enough, Chris, you mentioned, and then we spoke a bit about Gary Bennett's debut when he scored against Southampton. In the early half of the 1980s, it was quite common for Sunderland to get a couple of good results at the start of the season. We didn't always then continue on with that, but we did do well in those opening games, and 1982 was definitely an instance of that. The year before, we had been Alan Durbin's first season, and again we'd started well. We'd drawn 3-3 at Ipswich, who at that time were one of the best teams in the country. That was one of McCoist's first games, wasn't it, Chris? We've spoke about McCoist as well.
Yeah. Sorry, Andrew, just at the start of that season, just to put that little bit into perspective, because I've got a little quote from Durbin in that summer before the start of the season, before that Villa game, where he actually said, we are in a better overall situation than a year ago. This is this side is as good as the one I had at Stoke 2 seasons ago, and that team finished 11th in the First Division. I have told the players that, and I mean it. Obviously, I am taking into account the manner in which we finished last season. We were playing well, and we didn't want the season to end.
Yeah. Well, the season did start with a bit of optimism, although, funnily enough, in pre-season, our record hadn't been too clever. And again, that's something that's been the case this year, and it's just another reminder that results in pre-season might not always be an indication of what you're going to get when the real stuff starts. But yes, Durbin's previously, that had been his first season in charge, and we'd started well. We got that draw at Ipswich. We then beat Aston Villa at home at Roker Park. It was Tom Ritchie and Gary Rowell scored for us. We then, later on in the season, we'd lost at Villa Park 1-0. I don't know if you remember, Kelvin, but January 1982 was a really harsh winter. We only played one league game, and then come February we were struggling. We lost to Villa, as I say. It meant, because we had a lot of games to catch up on and we'd started slipping, it meant that on the final day of the season we had to beat Man City to stay up. We did that. And that meant 11 days later, Sunderland fans were able to sit back and watch the European Cup final, which was in Rotterdam and happened to be against Aston Villa. So Villa beat Bayern Munich, and you probably both remember Nigel Spink, who became a future coach at Sunderland. He famously came on as a very inexperienced goalkeeper. He came on in the final. So yeah, that's how Villa won it. They beat Bayern Munich 1-0 with young Nigel Spink in goal. And it meant that for the start of the 1982-83 season, we had probably the toughest assignment possible to start the year. You've got to go and visit the home of the reigning champions of Europe. As I've said, in pre-season, we'd only won 2 of 7, Chris.
But what I will very quickly say, they only finished 11th in the first division the season before. Yes,
that's true. Villa had, I think it was a little bit of a surprise when they won the league the year before that. They did well to win the league, obviously, but they hadn't been tipped to win the division. It was a little bit out of the blue. Then in that season, 81-82, the European Cup took priority, quite obviously. I think Villa changed managers during the season. The league form wasn't all that good, but as they started to get through the rounds of the European Cup, and obviously the first few games are against maybe teams from weaker leagues, they then realise, we're gonna put all of our attentions into this European Cup run. But yes, you're right, Chris, they weren't great in the league, but even still, just that thing of playing the European Cup holders, we had only won 2 of pre-season, and then Aston Villa, quite understandably, had the trophy on display before the game. So, that really makes you realise, we're in for a tough battle here, lads. So it was shaping up to be a hard afternoon. I'm going to go through the starting 11 now, and Kelvin, if you want to, you can just chime in at any point with chants for any of these players. I've had a stab at picking the formation, but if any of this sounds wrong, please shout up. Chris Turner in goal. That was the one position I was confident on. We then had Venison at right back. We had Elliott and Ian Atkins in the middle of defence. Ian Atkins was making his debut for us. Left back was Ian Munro, who was captain. In midfield, we had Pickering, Chisholm, Buckley, and Stan Cummins. And up front, we had Colin West and another name there who we've discussed earlier today, lads, Ali McCoist, who, whenever we talk about Ali McCoist, I always remember, long before I learnt he played for Sunderland, he was my era of Question the Sport on the TV. He was one of the captains, so that's how I used to see Ali McCoist. So, Kelvin, fair to say that's a pretty decent lineup, even though we are going into a tough game. That's quite a strong side.
Not bad.
Very quickly,
that's
Gary Rowell on the bench.
Yes, Gary Rowell on the bench, and we'll mention him in a bit, because although he didn't come on, he was very close to being brought on in the second half, Chris. So again, another really famous name in the squad that day. So we do have a tough game lined up, but that's a fairly strong Sunderland side. And another parallel with now, a bit like the pre-season results being a bit iffy, that's a very young team we've named there. That was one of the main features of Alan Durbin's time. He really wanted to encourage young, homegrown players to come through. You said you were at the game, Kelvin. What was the mood beforehand?
I wasn't at this one, sorry. I wasn't at this one, Andrew.
Can I just in case, because you're talking about homegrown players, and there was a huge story building before this game involving Sean Elliott. And I'll let you go on to it, Andrew, if you wanted to talk about that.
No. No, go on.
Because and again, a certain on this day writer, C. Wynn, wrote about it. I had to remind myself about it, to be honest. But the whole build up for this game, as you said, opening day of the season, but it's centered around Sean Elliott, obviously cracking defender. Probably Kelvin knows more about him than me. I didn't see him play, but everything you read, cracking defender, 25-year-old at the time. And the Aston Villa boss at the time, Tony Barton, had publicly come out in the 2 days before the game, ahead of kickoff, that he wanted to add him to his Aston Villa squad. And he actually said, and this was a quote from the Aston Villa manager, he said, I will now be talking to the Sunderland manager, Alan Durbin, about Sean Elliott after the game on Saturday. To do anything now would place unfair pressure on Sean Elliott. It seems clear, though, that the deal will go through, although it will have to go to an independent tribunal. Sunderland wants $650,000 for Elliott, but my offer will be nowhere near that. And the headlines before the game was full-time showdown, crunch after match, all of these things. And Sean Elliott had to come out and speak before the game, and he actually said, I have been placed under pressure by both managers. I'm the one in the middle and the one who has to blot everything out of the mind. But as far as Sunderland are concerned, I will be 110% committed to them on Saturday. It's going to be strange, but my objective on Saturday is to stop Villa scoring. Whatever happens after the game won't interfere with the 90 minutes I will give to Sunderland. Obviously, after the game, I will be interested to discuss terms Villa are offering. I am a free agent, and that's my right. So it's an amazing build-up to this first game of the season against Villa.
You're dead right, Chris. And that C win is a fantastic writer because he's set the scene perfectly.
I got one right.
Because that no, it does set the scene because that has a real influence on the game. I think at that point, Elliott was signing a week-by-week contract, but Sunderland still retained his registration or whatever it was. So Durban did perhaps think, I'm going to get a bit of money to play with here. But nonetheless, Elliott was ultra-professional in the game. There was no doubt during the match that he wasn't 100% focused. In the first half, though, that said, he did struggle a bit. Now, I don't think it was necessarily because of the will he, won't he be moving. But Rob Hindmarch was suspended. He must have been sent off or had too many yellows the previous season. So this suspension rolled over to the new year, the new campaign, sorry. Him not being on the pitch was a real issue because Peter With, did he score the winner in the European Cup final, Kelvin? Does that sound right?
Yeah.
He was fantastic in the air, and Elliott struggled with that. That was more Rob Hindmarch's duties to do the heading aspect of the game. So Peter With was really influential in the first half. He knocks down a cross halfway through the opening 45 for Gordon Cowans to score from close range and put Villa ahead. Thankfully, though, as the half wears on, Peter With pulls a thigh muscle. That impacts how well he can play for the rest of the half. And then during the halftime break, he gets a bit of treatment, realises he can't continue. And that means that in the second half, Elliott and Atkins start dominating at the back. They're much more able to keep Villa at bay.
But just quickly mentioned a very specific player in the Villa side who ran the show in that first half, making his debut, certain 18-year-old. It went on to play for Liverpool, Mark Walters. And he ran the show. He ran the show according to all of the reports in that first half. And the opening paragraph from the report after the game was, the headlines were shocker for Villa and all this sort of stuff. But the opening paragraph said, young Mark Walters had a sparkling debut, making the Villa frontline sizzle in the sun against Sunderland at Villa Park today. So even though they got hammered, Mark Walters got all of the plaudits, all of the headlines, because he ran us ragged, especially in the first 20 minutes. He was apparently, according to the reports, fantastic.
Very speedy, tricky winger, him. Very, very potent on his day.
He
went to Rangers, I think.
He went to Rangers and then Liverpool. I thought he should have gotten more caps for England. I thought he was fantastic.
Did Mark Walters play against us in the 92 Cup final?
He did, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, well done, Chris. You've upset me now. You've brought up a traumatic childhood experience.
And then I'm sure he played against us at Roker Park for, and I want to say, I don't know, when he dropped down years later when he was kind of 35 or something, Swindon or something like that.
Yes.
I always thought he was a brilliant. I loved Mark Walters.
Was the Swindon game, was that the one in the rain where Martin Smith scored a cracker to keep, and it was when Peter Reid had just arrived?
Potentially,
Yeah.
or it might have been. Yeah, that probably would have been about right. But yeah, I always thought I thought he was a crack. Should have gotten more caps for England, I thought. But apparently on this day he ran the show in the first half. But as you said, Andrew, we improved in the second half. Got ourselves together.
We did. I'm in a funk now though, because you've mentioned that you've reminded me of the '92 Cup final. So yes, we'll say he played for Swindon when Martin Smith scored on a really rainy day, and that'll get us out of me bad mood. But yeah, sorry, we did. Second half, we started gaining a bit of control. Just before the hour mark, though, Chris Turner does need to make an absolutely trademark Chris Turner reflex save to keep it at 1-0. At that point, Durban, who'd been watching the game from the director's box, which oddly enough, I think Martin mentioned last week, you don't get managers watching the game from the stands anymore. But back then it was still fairly common. Alan Durban wasn't too impressed. He'd seen the team improve in the second half, but they still were very close to going 2-0 down. So he makes his way to the touchline, and at that point he's about to bring Gary Rowell on as a sub. And I don't know if seeing one of the subs getting warmed up and getting stripped off, ready to come on, has been enough to give Sunderland another boost, because suddenly we scored 2 goals in 5 minutes and just completely stunned Villa. They've started the game well. They're 1-0 up. They're the European Cup holders. They're thinking it's all easy. And then suddenly we smash 2 in, like in the blink of an eye, and the game changes completely. Colin West was the one who equalised. Mentioned him in the quiz question as being the first scorer. He'd done really well at the end of the previous season and had been a big part in Sunderland staying up. Durban had put a lot of faith in him and brought him into the team, and he was on fire at this point. So he's equalised when he's thrown himself at the ball after Cummins had crossed it in. Then it's Question of Sport's favourite team captain, Ali McCoist. He scores to put Sunderland ahead, having forced a save from Jimmy Rimmer, who was the goalkeeper Spink had to replace in the final a few months earlier. Rimmer makes the save. Cummins then comes in for the rebound. That gets blocked on the line, but eventually McCoist is able to react and put the ball high into the net. It's suddenly bedlam in the away end, because these 2 goals have turned it around, and they're scored right in front of the away fans. I must have misheard, Kelvin. I thought you were part of the travelling supporter base that day, but you must have had something better to do that day. And yeah, the fans are shell-shocked. Villa are absolutely shell-shocked. And Alan Durban, just cool as you like, goes, "Oh, well, Gary, sit back down on the bench. I don't think I will change the team now. We'll the managing without you." And from then on, we absolutely dominate. Nick Pickering has a shot that's deflected just wide with about 10 minutes to go, and you start to think, 2-1, we've had a lot of the play. Are we going to get hit by a sucker punch? But no, with about 5 or 6 minutes left, Pickering gets the ball and runs half the length of the pitch. Keeper's coming out to close the angle, and just as if he does this type of thing all day, every day, he just finds the net, makes it 3-1, and yeah, there we go. Sunderland are champions of Europe, and I'm sure nobody could dispute that definition. So really, really good start to the season. And as Chris mentioned, there was all this story around Elliott, and the quotes I read, Chris, Tony Barton threw out of it. it's almost as if he just assumes that, without even consulting Elliott, that he wants to come to Villa.
Yeah.
There's no sort of, oh, we'll make a bid, we'll talk to the lad. It's kind of, yeah, we want him, and therefore he's going to come. The reason he was looking at Elliott was one of his regular players, Ken McNaught, was in a bit of a contract dispute and couldn't decide whether he wanted to stay at the club or not. And I wonder if this whole situation did cause a bit of niggle in the Sunderland team. Elliott spoke very well there about how he would play and give it a 110%. I think the figure was you mentioned, Chris. I just wonder if the team kind of thought, who do this lot think they are? They're going on as if they can just cherry pick one of our better players without us having a say in the matter. We're gonna give them a game, and we're gonna show them, we're not just here for your benefit and for you to take our players as and when you fancy. So yeah, I think that had an impact on how we played. And sure enough, Elliott didn't go. Ken McNaught decided to stay on, and just a nice little full stop to this was in January, the return game, so early 1983, the return game at Roker Park. McNaught actually scores an own goal. It's Sunderland win again. So, McNaught was at the centre of this whole Elliott story. He then scores an own goal later on in the season. Frank Worthington, by that point, is signed for the club. He scores the other goal for Sunderland. And not only have we beaten the European champions, but we've gone and done the double against them. So that's pretty good going from the team. They've done well there.
Brilliant. Well, that's a good place to leave it as being European champions, because I'm eager to get on to Kelvin's section about a Sunderland legend. So we'll move on August the 28th. 1990, and we touched on it earlier on with the opening day of the season at Norwich City, where John McPhail made his only top flight appearance with a really long, distinguished, fantastic career, and he was brilliant for us. But this was our first home fixture, which was the Tuesday after. It was a nice, warm, balmy evening, and it was when kind of football started to come out of that era of the 1980s, with lots of kind of fences around in stadiums, a lot of crowd trouble, a lot of, you go back to Hillsborough and those unfortunate kind of incidents that occurred. And 1990, that World Cup was a kind of change. And this game is almost kind of that flipping point where things kind of changed in terms of where it felt like it at Sunderland, because we had two stars of that World Cup in terms of Gary Lineker and Paul Gascoigne coming basically the second game into the season to Roker Park for our first home game. Now, there's two things I want to quickly touch on this before we move on. First is John McPhail, and obviously he played in that Norwich City game. And I just want to read from Dennis Smith's book because about John McPhail, because he said, unfortunately, another player I now know I let go too early was our captain, centre-half John McPhail. Monty was a different case to Gates, who also left. After appearing in our opening game, he was offered the opportunity to join Hartlepool United as a player coach, where he helped them to promotion from Division 4 the first time of asking, playing over 40 games. It's ridiculous to admit this, but as well as the attraction of beginning the path towards a coaching or managerial career, part of the attraction of joining Hartlepool was they were also paying John more money than he'd been earning at Roker, which is a huge thing. And, later on, we kind of needed him in that season. So it's an unbelievable kind of situation where we're in the top flight and Hartlepool are paying more money. But that was one aspect to it. So that was the opening day of the season. And then Kevin Ball, as I said, came in for the second game, which was against Spurs. And we ended up drawing that 0-0. But something, and again, I mentioned to Kelvin and Andrew before the game, not something too many people know, but again, Dennis Smith wrote about it in his book ahead of that Spurs game. He said that the sense of anticipation for the new season from everyone involved at Sunderland was so great that over 30,000 turned up to watch our first home game following promotion. The visitors were Tottenham Hotspur, Gaza, Lineker and Mabbott and all. The emotional occasion saw excited supporters allowed the 5 years of torment which had followed the dismal relegations of 1985 and 1987 to slip away from their shoulders. It was a heady evening for everyone at the football club except one man, me. A few hours before the kick-off of this massive game, I had received a phone call to inform me that my father had died. It was a devastating piece of news, a massive event in my life. Dad had spent much of the time since my mother's death 15 years earlier following my career, often coming to games. We'd become as close to each other as any time in our lives, so this news was extremely tough to take. And he did end up being in the dugout, and he then went on to say, I got us through the game, from which we emerged with a point and a solid performance against a very good Spurs side who would go on to lift the FA Cup that season. As soon as I had completed my post-match press duties, I got into the car and drove down to Stoke to be with the rest of the family. I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? I mean, but to coincide, Kelvin, with probably his biggest time as a manager, getting up to that top flight and having that news on what should have been a fantastic occasion for him at rugby.
I mean, God, sitting listening to that, I had no idea that he'd done that, Chris, until you mentioned it before, but it kind of fits his personality a bit to be able to do that. As a player, he was a hard, 100% committed player. I remember him as with Stoke. He was just a boy you wanted in the trench with you rather than coming at you. And it doesn't surprise me that he's done that. And that, you know, he's obviously had no emotional conflict, if you want, in terms of thinking about doing that either. I do this, I get that job done, and then I go home and get another job done and help my family through this situation. You have to say there was a lot about Dennis Smith to like, wasn't there, when he was manager with us? There was a hell of a lot to like, and that he didn't. You know, he's not milked that in any way. He hasn't. I mean, how many people knew about that? I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know about that. It never came out in the press. Or I know we're talking about different days, but that kind of thing these days would have been milked up and down and roundabout. You know, so fair play to him. Fair play to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not taking the edge away from that. Was this the game where it was a midweek evening match, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Was this the game where Paul Gascoigne was getting bombarded with Mars bars?
Yeah, and he picked one up and ate it, didn't he?
He picked it up and ate it, didn't he? That wasn't very far away from where I was standing that night.
I think it was down by the main stand paddocks. I'm sure he did it.
He took a corner. He went to take a corner kick.
Yeah.
And in literally in the first sort of minutes of the game, early on into the game. And if I was embellishing this, I would say I was aware of whistling noises over my head, and when I looked up, there were volleys of Mars bars coming and landing nearby him.
Kelvin, how many of those Mars bars were thrown by you? I reckon you will have nipped into the corner shop before and got yourself a multi-pack.
Andrew, if you look at the size of me, nobody got fat on the food I give away, mind, I tell you.
You mentioned there about McPhail and he missed out on the game against Spurs, but we got a good result against Spurs. I really do think that was, and as Smith has admitted himself, letting go of him was a shame. Because you talked about a game against Spurs where we drew 3-3 and Colin Pascoe played well. I seem to think we had the lead in that game, and there was a lot of times in matches we were ahead, and you just wonder, could you have brought McPhail on for 10-15 minutes at the end to just steady things up?
Yeah.
You know, he might have had a part to play.
We were 2-0 up in that game at White Hart Lane, and I've wrote about this season before, saying how many times we might have been some sort of record for Sunderland how many times we lost the lead that year.
Yeah.
And if you think about Eric Gates as well, because Davenport got injured throughout the season, Gabardini got injured throughout the season, we ended up with a strike force. I remember against Crystal Palace, which we won at Roker Park. I think Warren Hawke Oh no, Kieran Brady and David Rush played up front, and I think Kieran they both scored and we won 2-1. And then there was a game, I'm sure it was Southampton at home, where David Rush played up front with Warren Hawke, and we were struggling. And you throw Eric Gates and John McPhail in there, who knows? Who knows? We'll never know now. But anyway, but yes, let's move on because, like I said, I'm desperate to get on to Kelvin's segment because as well on August 28th, 2002, Jason McAteer gave Sunderland all 3 points at Ellen Road in what turned out to be our only league victory away from home all season. So that was fun. 2006, Roy Keane was appointed new Sunderland manager. He watched from the stands as Niall Quinn won his one and only game against West Bromwich Albion. And it was also Toby Hussein's debut as well. And we'll get into the 29th of August. We'll whiz through this because 1925, and we'll talk about Dave Halliday another day because he deserves a good segment. He scored 2 goals on his Sunderland debut at Birmingham. He went on to score 10 goals in his first 4 games for the lads. And I think he scored a century of goals in 101 games or something like that. So he deserves a lot of time, which we'll give to him another day. On the also on the 29th in 1928, Sunderland benefited from 2 own goals for the only time in their history against Blackburn Rovers as we won 3-1 at home. 1979, again, we'll touch on this another day because there's also the second leg, potentially. Sunderland played Newcastle United for the first time in the League Cup. We were 2-0 ahead and we ended up drawing 2-2. And we'll move on to 1981. Ali McCoy, Steve Monroe and Nick Pickering made their debuts on the opening day. 3-3 at Ipswich Town, but Sunderland were winning 3-1, of course. 2003, Claudio Reyna signed for the club. He moved from the club, went to Manchester City for $2.5 million. It was on the same day that Emerson Thome moved to Bolton Wanderers on a free transfer because I think we didn't want to pay the extra for him to play one more game for us because I think we had probably another £5 to pay and we didn't want to pay it at the time, something like that. Moving on to 2015 on August the 29th, Sunderland draw at Villa Park 2-2 with Jan Mvila and Jermaine Lenz scoring under Dick Advocat. I'm sure Mvilia's was a cracking free kick from memory. I might have that one wrong, but I'm sure it
was. No, I think you're right there.
Yeah, and we've got everyone in tears because he didn't sign permanently now. So we'll move swiftly on to August the 30th. And again, this is one we might touch on another day because it was a momentous day, the 30th of August. And again, I've wrote a piece on this as a combined piece before, and it was also in the book SAFC 365. If anybody's got that, they can turn to that page on 30th of August because I wrote about it. Momentous day on the 30th of August because actually in 1919, Charlie Buchan scored the first goal for Sunderland on the resumption of league football after World War I, which must have been a fantastic occasion for everyone. It was a 2-1 home win over Aston Villa. And it was actually, bizarrely, our first ever league game played in August as well. But then on the same date, 20 years later, in 1939, it was the opposite, where football actually stopped before World War II. So it was announced that the war was breaking out, and then football stopped exactly 20 years later. It was the last game before that. So 30th of August, and again, I've written a piece on the site. You can check that out, that I've done in the past. And obviously it's in SAFC 365. We move on to 1958. Sunderland picked up their first points outside the top flight with a 2-1 home victory over Liverpool. And it's easy to remember, actually, if you look back at the leagues, that Liverpool weren't always the force that they went on to be. But we had to wait another 24 games and 44 years later for our next home win over Liverpool, which probably speaks volumes as well. 1975 on the 30th of August, Tony Towers scored twice as the lads beat Blackpool at Roker, and it was Bob Stokoe in charge of us against his former club, of course. But this is the one I want to get onto because 1978, Kelvin, Bobby Kerr, Sunderland legend, 1973 FA Cup winning captain. He made his final appearance for Sunderland in 2-0 second round League Cup home defeat to Stoke City.
Correct. And what although we didn't know it at the time, what a day, what a sad day to go out on a defeat and to go out in the manner of defeat that we did. It was no slight on Kerr. He did his usual. He ran like he always did, and the team, after they went an early goal down, and then had Jackie Asher sent off for a second bookable offence on 33 minutes, and Stoke scored from that. Dennis Smith was playing. He towed everything away after that. He seemed to be at the heart of Stoke's defence as we mounted a bit of an effort to get back into it, but it wasn't to be on the night. Viv Busby came on as sub, I think, as well in that game, if I remember rightly. So it was a sad way for it to be his last game. I don't think anybody was aware that it would have been his last game at that point, because there was quite a lot of fan reaction going on against. People weren't happy with Jimmy Adamson, and there was a bit of a stay away protest. It was harder to organise these things back then. We didn't have social media. We didn't have mobile phones, so, but apparently, unbeknownst to me, coming in from Morpeth, there was a bit of a stay away protest going on, and people weren't happy. As I recall, there was a big banner over the side of the main stand, I think it was, saying Adamson out. And Jimmy Adamson was he'd had some things to say about the supporters in our first league game of the season against Charlton, saying that the team were feeling under loads of pressure because the support was getting at them, and having sort of complained about the supporters. He did at the end of that game, the Stoke game, say that he thought the support had been really well behind the team despite the result. But it was a shame for Bobby for that to be his last game, because this is a lad that has
Kelvin,
given.
Can I just quickly, before you go into the start of Bobby Kerr, just incidentally in that lineup, the Stoke lineup as well, you mentioned Dennis Smith, but in goal you've also got Roger Jones, who was the coach under Dennis Smith at Sunderland, and on the bench he came on to replace Garth Crooks with about 15 minutes to go, was Viv Busby. And again, just sorry, alongside Dennis Smith, I think he was in front of him in midfield was Howard Kendall.
Yeah.
So a lot of good players in that Stoke side.
Some very good players in it. I think actually they were top of the second division at the time when they came to us. I don't think they went up that year, did they? Well, they finished third.
Of course, Alan Durbin, their manager as well.
Yeah. Lots of connections there. I did actually see his Bobby's last league game at Roker Park was that Charlton game, and he did what he always did. He used to run his socks off, Bobby Kerr. They used to have a song about him, He has another song coming. He's here, he's there, he's nearly everywhere. Bobby Kerr. Except it isn't nearly, but I'm not gonna. If Andrew's mum's listening, I'm not going to swear on the radio.
Just on that front, Kelvin, and you're probably going to go into it, but and again, I want you to put me right, because having only seen him play in that kind of almost that FA Cup final, really, when I've seen him in a full game. But in my mind, and please correct us if I'm wrong, because it's just been this kind of link that I've had to him. I've always had him as a similar player to Alan Ball, but I don't know if I'm completely wrong on that front.
Yeah, I could see why, he actually was probably smaller and lighter than Alan Ball in build. I mean, he was, I think he was 8 stone wet through by the time he was playing this game, and he was 7 stone when he first came to the club as an apprentice. I used to have a friend, same age as me, watched the team all the way through like I did, and he used to love Bobby Kerr, and he used to say he's a mini with a Rolls Royce engine. I always thought that was that is a very good way of describing him. This lad just perpetual motion when he played. But he played his last league game was against Charlton, and that was a win. But again, the background to that was the fans not being happy with Adamson. They just weren't happy at the way things were going. Bobby comes to the club as an apprentice in 1963. A long association with the club. He's scouted by the famous Charlie Ferguson, who was spoke about a few weeks ago, one of Alan Brown's pickups. Charlie sees him playing in a Dumbartonshire schools game, invites him down to Roker for a trial. And when he plays the trial, believe it or not, they pick him at right back. And Alan Brown's remark on the trial was there was only one player on the pitch, the little lad at right back, and so they played him out of position, but he's still made a mark. He signs pro in November 1964. It's interesting because the time that he comes to the club, there's this emphasis on youth going on. Brownie's got that kind of emphasis and putting a lot of energy into that. Charlie Ferguson's, got his network, and they're all over Scotland picking players up because they pick another lad up at the same time called Billy Hughes. And what a fine player he was. So Hughesy and Kerr playing the same youth team together, and he plays for the youth team in 64-65. The youth team they have a great run with. You'll recall Brian Clough was sort of involved a little bit in the coaching of that team, and then in 65-66 a lot in the coaching of that team. But a couple of other lads just to flag up in that team: Colin Todd, John O'Hare, Colin Suggett, and another good lad that you hear less about, but he was a handy enough player. I saw this lad play a bit, Jimmy Shoulder, who was a fullback. I think Lenny Ashurst, if it hadn't been for Lenny Ashurst, Jimmy Shoulder would have gotten a lot more games for the club. Kerr helps that youth team to the semi-finals of the FA Youth Cup. He scores 4 goals along the way. He's making his mark, but he's a flying right winger, is what he is at the time. He can shift. He's got the speed. He's got goals in him. He's got good ball control. He's courageous as anything. There's loads of remarks about, even as a 7 stone player, that he would just fly into tackles. He'd put himself in there. He wasn't shy in getting stuck in. And then in that youth team of 65-66, which was a cracking team, we got to the final of the FA Youth Cup, and he plays a big part in that as well. It's the same lads: Todd, Suggett, Hughes, Kerr. Brian Chambers comes into that. Brian Chambers played quite a few games for the club, and Derek Foster's in goals. And Malcolm Moore, who played a few games. So that team gets through to the final of the Youth Cup, and they're beaten over 2 games by by Arsenal. But by this point, if you were, I was dead fortunate. I used to get taken to some of them games, and I was at that point myself a flying right winger in my own right. And what I was getting was, keep your eye on that little lad there. Watch him play his game, and whoa, it was great fun watching him. He honestly looked like a schoolboy playing with men. But once the game kicked off, yeah, bugger. He was nothing of the sort. Like, you knew you had a Spitfire out there that was just gonna do business. His debut, fantastic debut he had. It was a horrible day. I was at the game. I guess I feel he's one of these players. You lads have got the same players that you grow up with. You see their first game and you see their last game, and you kind of grow up with them, So his debut, George Hurd at the last minute got a thigh strain, and he comes into the game on December the 31st, 1966 against Man City. And what a horrible day that was. It was, and I was bloody freezing in the Roker end, absolutely freezing. There was just short of 29,000 there. I think the weather had put a few people off, but by this point we were mired in a relegation battle, and City were down there with we. And he comes on, and I mean, in reality, if I said to you, he was the only bright spark in the game. He had a fantastic game, fleeing up and doing that right wing and just everywhere. He was everywhere, and it didn't take long for that song about him to get going, because he bloody was everywhere when he played. It was a fantastic debut for him, but not a very good game. The conditions, the pit, the bluster, the wind, hard trying to play in those conditions. So it's 0-0 each. We're heading into the last sort of minutes of the game. And even from this early on, I will tell you, this game was one of the games and one of the reasons why I never leave the stadium until the final whistle's blown. Because he scores in the last minute, and what a goal! What a goal he scores. Todo plays the ball up. It's like an angled ball, and I think it's George Mulhall. It's interesting when you look at the paper reports, because some of them say it was John O'Hare, but my memory says it was George Mulhall that a clever header out to him, and he skips by their centre half and just buries it in the roof of the net. The bloody roar for him. And one of the things I do remember, which was just a lovely thing, when you think that there was a lot of division in the dressing room at that point. We're talking about the Baxter Hurley era, and Baxter was on the pitch that day and hardly struck a bat. But what I remember about that is when he scored it and he took off, and he wasn't quite, because he was known for doing a forward roll when he scored. He used to do this like hand forward roll. He didn't do that on that day, but he took off, and the whole crowd were up. And what I remember is the only person that didn't rush to him was Jimmy Monty in the goal. The whole of the bloody team ran to him, and it was a lovely, lovely visual for a young lad that looked like he should have been a ball boy. And it was fantastic. And the plaudits for him from that derby. Remember, I've still got this in one of my scrapbooks upstairs. There was a Sunday Sun used to have a reporter called John Barrett, and he was writing about the game. He wrote some pretty dour stuff about Jim Baxter and about the game itself, but about Kerr, he said, Kerr is really too small for the job, but has so much talent, running power and courage, as to be he would compulsively remind you of George Best.
Mm.
And that was his opening gambit on Bobby Kerr, that he reminded him of George Best. And you could see where he was coming from. I mean, Bestie, when George Best started playing football, he was a really slight character. Now, a lot of people think of Best a little bit later on in his career, when his vices had added a bit of poundage to him, and that, But when he first came into football, Bestie was a slim, almost wraith type figure when he played. So I definitely could see where he was coming from, and I was convinced as a young lad that we had a world beater there in Bobby Kerr. Fantastic debut for him. And what happens is, having been mired in the relegation battle, and fans not being happy, we then go on an 11-game run of being undefeated, and Bobby's in the team playing away for all those games. And I mean, he scores 7 goals in that run. It just seemed like every week you just thought, oh, Bobby, well, apart from Bobby, who else is going to score this week, and he lifts the team.
Just quickly, Kelvin, just to put it in perspective, five league goals in 8 league games.
Yeah. Fantastic. He was one of them players who just comes in, his debut, he scores, and it lifts the whole team. I'd even say to you that for a brief moment, it seemed to lift Jimmy Baxter out of his wherever he disappeared to, because it was fantastic debut, and a fantastic. I remember it as being a really exciting sort of 11 games. I mean, one of these games was against Newcastle, and actually Baxter did turn up for that game. He played well that day, Jim Baxter. But we'd beaten him 3-0 earlier in the season. And I'd been taken to that game, and it was fantastic. I've written about it. I was taken to that game. I was parked on the fence at the Leazes end with my Sunderland scarf on, and there were others on the Leazes end with the, kids on the fence, and we won 3-0 and battered them. And then back we come for this game, and we win 3-0 again. And Bobby Kerr scores in the 56th and 72nd minute. It's nils each at half time. It was quite an intense first half, I remember. And, a little bit of twitchiness, massive crowd in the ground, a little bit of twitching going on. Oh, God, what's going to happen? And but Bobby Kerr scores in the 56th, 72nd minute, and George Mulhall scores with a couple of minutes to go. But Baxter had a hand in, he played a part in all 3 of those goals in one way or another. But Kerr, he had the, what is that thing about young players? They just know no fear, and you drop them into a tense relegation tussle. We've had other players that have done that. They're just fearless. They just, get us on there, I'll play. I'll do it, and he was just a joy, an absolute joy to behold in those games. So 11 games, the 12th game, we're drawn against Leeds in the FA Cup at Roker Park, and that's another. And I think, if my memory serves me well, we played Newcastle in 50-odd thousand there, and then we've got Leeds in the FA Cup at home. And Leeds are riding high. I mean, I think they've had 2 second-place finishes by this point in the league. They came up with us in 63, 64, and Revy's got them really ticking. But there's a darker side to Leeds, but we'll get to that. Game, fantastic crowd in, tough game. The game actually finishes 1-1 each. But in the 66th minute, there's I have to say it was a 50-50 ball. It looked like a 50-50 ball. I don't really feel that Norman Hunter, he's another northeastern lad, they used to call him the Berkeley Bruiser, I think. But he had a reputation, Hunter, for putting his foot in and on people. But in this instance, I think it probably had more to do with Kerr's courage. You know, his feistiness. He went for a ball that he shouldn't have gone for, and it broke his leg, and he was carried off. I think people know what happened with that series of games against Leeds. After the game finished 1-1, we went down to Leeds. You know, that game was drawn, and then we ended up playing at Hull, Boothbury Park, and we got beat by a very controversial refereeing decision, where there's still people who'll tell you that game was bent. There was something wasn't right about that game, and I think Peter Lorimer wrote about that in his autobiography, saying that Revie had told them before the game, if you're anywhere near the box, dive. This ref will give away a penner, and he did. And I think whichever player it was, I think it was Jimmy Greenough, was nowhere. He wasn't in the box. It was a debatable foul, and he wasn't even in the box. They give a pen, and so we'll lose the tie, but we've also lost Bobby Kerr.
Well, I was going to say two things about this. It says a lot because you had to commit GBH or kind of murder to get sent off, and we had George Hurd and George Mulhall sent off after that penalty. So clearly the Sunderland players knew there was something up, and
furious,
and they said so. But actually, just in terms of Bobby Kerr's broken leg, do you think the tackle he made was in response to Leeds' let's say, physical tactics? Do you think it happened because it was in response to Leeds United?
Well, I always like reading Bob Cass. Is that a journalist that people have read before? And I always thought he was quite a balanced lad about both teams. He had, Sunderland and Newcastle. I always liked reading his comments and what he said about this after this game. The home game that Kerr got injured in. He wrote, never have I seen a team whose blatant plan was sheer destruction of what is good in football. And that wasn't an unusual response from the press about this Leeds team. They used to take some hammerings in the press for the way that they played that game. And that's I've said this before about them in this pod. They had some great players, but some of these players, I think everybody knows that Billy Bremner was a hard, rugged, stick his foot in, but he could play football. When you mention the name Johnny Giles, people will go, "Oh, what a lovely player he was! What a silky player, great ball player." Johnny Giles was a dirty bugger when he didn't have the ball, and he was one of the leaders of the gang, So they just had these players. Revie had them. If you can't get the ball, get the man, because we'll win at all costs. And we'll win any way we can. And there was a little sideshow to that night. That day. Kerr's carried off on a stretcher, obviously with a bad injury. And Jackie Charlton's walking down the tunnel, shouting at Sunderland fans, "You're out, you're out." He was a pugnacious get-in, wasn't he, when he played? There was a lot to like about Jackie Charlton, but he never liked Sunderland. That was always anyway. Bobby does he does try and make a comeback. He misses with the injury. What happens is he misses almost 18 months of football, because he's making a comeback in playing for the reserves at Portland Park. I think that was in January the following year. He's playing at Portland Park, and he breaks his leg again. And I'm going to say to you, because that's my neck of the woods, Ashington, I've played on that park a few times, and I'm sure he hit the divot that I hit one day. A lot of divots there used to be, but he breaks making light of something that, what it means is he misses 18 months of his career when he should be, on our park, learning his game and giving us everything that he'd given us in those first 11 games. It was a golden time that for young players. We had Todd Suggett, Hughes, Jimmy Shoulder. There was I've talked before about all the good young players that were coming through. And arguably, when you looked at who the experienced players were around them, you would have felt that they were coming into a nicely balanced team. The issue there was, for a while, was Jim Baxter in the mix there, because Ian McCall was determined to structure all of Sunderland's game around Baxter in the way that Baxter had orchestrated the Great Rangers team. And it was part of the problem, I think, in those years. That was part of the problem, that we had other players, Hurd, Mulhall, Hurley. We weren't a bad team. And a more expansive game might have helped. I think.
Just while you're there, Kelvin, just because he played on his comeback, he played 16 games in 68, 69, and then 69, 70 when we got relegated. I think it was something like 20 odd games. But that's obviously on the comeback trail. How much did it change him, those 2 leg breaks, in terms of being what type of player he was?
So it's a really good question, that, Chris. When he came back, he had to fight to get back into the team. He didn't just walk back into the team. And that wasn't just to do with getting his match fitness back. It was a different kind of team. We were struggling. He wasn't a very big kind of lad, and I think Alan Brown tried to, I always think about, because I was watching week in and week out by this point, I always think he tried to sort of bleed him back in a little bit, not just throw him straight back in, and picked the games at which he would play him. I thought he tried to look after him, because I'm pretty sure Brown thought he had a golden player there if he could look after him. And you're right, 69-70, the relegation season, 29 games, 3 goals. He's just about forced his way back into the team. I would say to you, from watching him in those, bear in mind those 11 games, Chris, watching him prior to his injury and then when he comes back, he's not as quick, he's not as zippy as he was. He's still everywhere. He's still, he gives you 90 minutes. He's perpetual motion. He never stops. He's still got that pugnacious kind of wee man syndrome, which I don't really know what that means, but but he's pugnacious, and the bigger the player, the more likelihood that Kerr will be over him like a rash,
Well, that's what got him into trouble in the first place.
I don't think I do think, he's a bright lad, Bobby Kerr. He's very sort of tactically aware. He really very quickly latched on to what his role was within the team. And when he comes back, he's more and more playing on the right hand side of midfield rather than as an out and out winger. That's not where he's playing. He's sort of playing a little bit further back, and his influence on the team. I mean, this is a lad. I was thinking about this the other day, and I'm thinking, am I just seeing this lad through rose-tinted specs? So I went back and I picked out about 4 or 5 games spread over 4 or 5 seasons, just randomly. I deliberately didn't pick the games that I could remember, and that really stood out. I thought, just pick a couple out here. And all you're reading the reports, and what you're getting is Kerr's here, Kerr's there, Kerr in defence, Kerr on attack, Kerr, so this was a lad that would pull in the Roker report stats. The Andrew would be scoring him 8 to 8.5 every blooming game. This was what Bobby Kerr used to give you week in, week out. 8 to 8.5 player he was. But he was a lovely continuity player as well. I used to love the way he was all, he just never stopped, and he wanted the ball. He never hid. He would always take the ball. Sometimes he used to get some right clatterings. Somebody would go piling into him, and his legs would go over the top of his head, and he'd land, and you think, oh my God, he'll never get up from that. And up he gets, he's back on again. He was like, he really was like, I don't know, a jackrabbit sometimes, if you knocked him down, he just jumped up again and got going again. He was a player who the crowd really, really, it didn't matter how badly we were playing. Kerr could just do something, or he'd try something that didn't come off, or somebody would absolutely bluter him, and it just would get the crowd going, and go on, Bobby lad, go on, son, get stuck in, man, and he was just like that. But the 71, 71, we hit this, he's embedded in the team by 71, and he plays 41 games, 10 goals. It's not the best of seasons. I think we were hoping that we would go up. I think there was a lot of hope that we could bounce straight back up. We didn't. We had problems. There were a lot. I think there were a lot of handy teams in the second division at that point, and it took a while to get ourselves sorted out. 71, 72, 46 games and 10 goals. So he's a guy that's contributing goals, but he's contributing. Yeah,
and he scored 10 goals the season before from midfield, kind of consistently 1 in 4. That's not bad, is it?
Yeah. He had goals in him, and he had a license to get forward, and as that team starts to take shape, of course we've got Hughesy and Tuet playing on the wings. We've got Porterfield comes into it. He's got a good relationship with Porterfield, but generally Porter's on the left hand side of midfield, Kerr's on the right. That's generally where the two of them start, and he becomes embedded in the team. He really is sort of one of the leaders on the pitch, one of the standard bearers, if you want. And we go into in 71, 72. We had a canny stab. I remember I was going home and away then, and I did think that we were gonna go up that season. I thought the team got on a bit of a roll, and he plays 46 games in that season, and he wasn't the only one. There were others. You've got to have a team. You've got to have 11 players. But I really did feel, boy, we're beginning to hit our straps here. We're going to do this. And he was a big part of that team, and some good partnerships starting to form fairly quickly. Him and Dick Malone comes in, and him and Dick Malone establish a really good partnership down the right-hand side. Tricky Dickie used to love flying flying away. He used to like attacking, and Kerr was quite astute. He'd drop in behind him. He'd set him away and then drop in behind him. We're talking about Stefan Schwartz earlier, doing that with Michael Gray. And Kerr was a little bit like that. He'd set Tricky on his road, and he'd be there covering the gap. You know, they had a cracking playing relationship, them two. But so 72, 73, of course, momentous season, but it doesn't start well, and we look like relegation fodder actually in the early stages of the season. There's something just not quite right, and Stokoe comes in. We know what happens. He changes the atmosphere around the place. He brings one or two players of experience in, and one of the key things that happens, and this Billy Elliott, who had a couple of games, his memory tells me a couple of games as temporary manager before Stokoe comes in. It was Billy Elliott that was responsible for moving Dave Watson back to centre half. And it solidifies the defence, and the Kerr's really him, Dick Malone, Davy Watson, and Ron Guthrie establish themselves, and it solidifies the defence. The only other issue was who was going to play beside Davy Watson, because Bob Stokoe didn't seem to fancy Richie Pitt, who played a lot of games there, and I thought was a decent young lad, a decent centre half, and he is, in the way that these things do happen. Pitt establishes himself because I can't remember who it was that got injured.
Maybe
somebody got injured.
Mick McGivern, maybe.
Well, McGivern was a bit like Pitt. I was never convinced that Stokoe was fancied him. You know,
Richie Pitt was out on loan to Arsenal, wasn't he? For a bit.
Well, he didn't go out. Do you know when Richie Pitt went out on loan to Arsenal? Was the Reading? We played Reading away in the FA Cup, and Stokoe had agreed that Pitt and Keith Coleman, who was another good lad, could go out on loan, but he played them. He wanted them in that squad so that he could cup tie them. That's what Stokoe was like. You know, he was always gonna win.
Just quickly on Bobby Kerr in terms of the start of the Bob Stokoe era, because you were just getting onto that. Bob Stokoe lost his first game against Jimmy Adamson's Burnley. Second game away to Portsmouth, it was 2-2. Billy Hughes scored in the 87th minute. We were losing 2-1. But it's almost another crossroads sliding doors thing. That last minute of the game, Bobby Kerr scores the winner in Bob Stokoe's second game. Now, if he hadn't gotten that momentum in his second game, who knows if everything else would have followed?
Yeah. Difficult to say. The only thing I would say to you, being around at that point, there was a team there. There was a team there the year before. There was just something. You just felt like Brownie needed to turn the dial on them a bit, because most of those players, most of them were Alan Brown players. He'd either, he bought Davy Watson and Dick Malone, and the rest of those players were players. He didn't buy Ian Porterfield, but he certainly blossomed Ian Porterfield. He was a big fan of Porterfield. And Mickey Horswell coming into the team, because in all honesty, you couldn't really say that Mickey Horswell was a fancy football player. He was a hard, grafting central midfield player, and I think when he first started playing, Mickey Horswell was actually a centre-half sweeper, if memory serves me well. But he made a difference when he came in, and that midfield of Porterfield, Horswell and Kerr that was a canny hinge as well, both going forward and defensively. They were a canny unit then. Bettered only by when we bought Tony Towers a year or two later, when Tony Towers came in. I think probably one of the best midfields I've seen is Ian Porterfield, Tony Towers, Bobby Kerr. That was they had a little bit of everything going on there. Nothing wrong with Mickey Horswell. He just creatively he wasn't bringing an awful lot. What he had to do was win the ball and give it to others to play. So Bobby Kerr. What can you say about 1973 that hasn't already been said? There's a couple of great books around worthy of a read. One of the ones that I was looking at this week was Rob Mason's 73 at 50, and what a lovely little edition. And of course, Lance Hardy's book, the stuff in there about 73 that I'd never come across before. But Bobby Kerr, he was essential to that cup final run. He was one of 8 players who played in every round. He never stopped. He every game he played, he just went out there, and was, as I've already said, perpetual motion. There were other things that he brings to the team. For a little lad, one of the things he used to have was a really long throw. And you think he looked like a ball boy sometimes, bringing the ball to the side of the pitch, and then he'd bloody hammer the ball into the box, from a throw, and you think, "Go on, Bobby lad." He had that. He had dead ball, corner kicks, free kick. He was quite often the lad to do that. Him and Billy Hughes used to kind of share that role a bit between them. He had a shot on him. If you remember in the cup final, the corner kick that Porter's goal comes from, Harvey tips a ball over the bar for that corner kick. That's Kerr's cross shot.
Yeah, cross shot. Yeah, give them some credit there, isn't it, Kelvin?
I don't think he claims any response. I think he himself said it was a cross that kind of went awry a little bit. So he's got a little bit of everything in him as a midfielder. He scores goals. There's a great compilation of his goals on YouTube. I think I might have sent that to you lads this morning. If you want to know what sort of player Bobby Kerr was, get a look at his 10 best goals on YouTube.
Kelvin, there you've spoken brilliantly about what a player Bobby Kerr was. Just funnily enough, yesterday I had a conversation about him with a mate of mine. As a person as well, really likeable fella. My mate, very fortunate to meet Bobby Kerr a couple of days ago, and said he was amazed by the fact that Bobby Kerr was just asking me mate about him.
Yeah,
this is a fella who probably can't go 2 days in Sunderland without somebody saying, "Oh, what about that time you did this for Sunderland? What about that cup final? Blah blah blah." But Bobby Kerr is also really happy to talk about you, like, "Oh, what have you got kids? What's your job? Blah blah blah." And my mate was just really impressed that this fella was just happy to have a chat, and it wasn't all about him. He would talk about other things, and it's really nice because Bobby Kerr is such a famous player. Even if he hadn't played in the 73 Cup final, he's probably one of Sunderland's best ever players, certainly from that era.
Yeah.
But he's a nice bloke as well, a quite a good conversationalist, and it was just something I thought was worth mentioning.
certainly that was my experience of him when I met him. Although the first time I met him in the toilets of a nightclub. So thankfully there wasn't a lot of conversation going on then.
You shook his hand, Kelvin, with you.
But you're right, and I've heard those stories loads about him. Just to throw in a couple of things about his character, Andrew, like that, seeing as you've took one to that. My dad always told us a story. I don't know where he got this from, and I'll take it as a story, as the story was told to me. Bobby Kerr on the night that they'd won the cup at the banquet. Apparently, his dancing was a thing to behold the night that they won the cup, and there were people like the sweet Susie Quattro, Hot Chocolate, and the Alan Price set. Alan Price was a big Sunderland fan, wasn't he? Yeah. And apparently Bobby was on the dance floor giving it laldy, and making sure everybody's drinks were topped up. He famously, when he was presented with a cup, I don't know if you've watched if you watch our cup final videos, you'll see this. He gets the cup and he disappears from the camera shot, and he turns and slips, and all you can hear is this clatter of and I think it's either the cup lid or the little plinth that it's on falling down the stairs, and he reappears, no bother lads, I've still got it, but man, he just and he's known for that. I'm conscious of time, but he's known for the FA Cup, and that was brilliant to be around. He was brilliant. Him running to Bob Stoko and jumping on Bob Stoko, and Stoko, lifting him almost like a little boy, fantastic stuff. He steals Bob Stoko's trilby, and that was his nature. I think off the pitch.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure Bob Stoko appreciated that. I have to admit, but just quickly, Kelvin, because just because we are talking about his last game, because look, I'm looking at his seasons from 70-71 when he came back. Look, you're talking in terms of this is number of games started, by the way. You're talking so from 70-71, 40 games, 50 games, 51 games, 51 games, 48 games, 49 games, 32 games. And then in 77-78, he started 38 games. Now, we are at the beginning of the 78-79 season. He's 31-year-old. I mean, can you give us the background and why you mentioned Jimmy Adamson and that side of it, and there's obviously because he left to go to Blackpool, which is the pull of Bob Stoko, but he played 38 games the season before. So what was the story behind him leaving? Yeah,
we're 5 years after 1973 in the FA Cup final, and he's the last player, he's the last squad member to play a game for Sunderland, and I think that does have a lot to do with Jimmy Adamson. He wanted his own players in. He seemed determined to ship the old guard out. I always felt Billy Hughes got a bit of a rough deal, I always felt Billy Hughes got a rough deal in that time. He is 31, but he's still. I mean, you can see he goes to Blackpool, and he plays two Bob Stoko. Bob Stoko's managing Blackpool, and the games he plays there, he's still held in quite high esteem at Blackpool. He goes to Hartlepool and plays 2 seasons there, and still held in high esteem there. Now, I know he's dropped down, and what happens there is he plays 4th, 3rd. He plays in every division that there is. I think it was to do with Adamson. I think he wanted his own team in. There was this horrible thing going on with the crowd and him. He wasn't a popular manager, Adamson, and I never quite got my finger on that. But he wasn't a popular manager, Adamson, and I think Kerr and Hughes and a number of players get caught up in that shift that Adamson wanted to make, and of course Adamson disappears. In that season he goes off to Leeds, and then takes Dave Merrington with him, who Merrington seemed to have a good rep in the team, but by this time Bobby Kerr's gone. I do think he could have given a bit more service to her. But the thing is, Kerr doesn't go to Blackpool till the March. I mean, he's still at the club all that season, not getting games, not getting picked.
Didn't know that.
I don't think there was any great injury issue.
That's even more strange, because I was looking at the first run of games there, and he starts every league game and starts this League Cup game and then just disappears. I mean, was the local media full of it? Were they trying to find out what was going on? Was there a bit back and forth between Kerr and Adamson in the media about it?
At the time, I think the media were, the local media. There did seem to be this sort of conflict, if you want, with Adamson. Adamson, he didn't play the crowd right. He kept. It was like he seemed to take a number of opportunities to say that we weren't doing our job as fans, and of course he was setting people's backs up. They were saying, right, well, if that's how you feel, and I think they had him down as a Newcastle supporter as well. He was an Ashington boy, Adamson, so I think they had him down as a Newcastle boy. I'm not so sure that was the issue. I think he was a very strong character, a little bit like Alan Brown, really. Quite a strong, single-minded kind of character, Adamson. He was quite dour as well, I think if he'd won the lottery, you wouldn't know from his face. Do you know what I mean? That's how he came across to me. I felt sometimes like he's, I could sometimes see what he was trying to do with the team. I wasn't as anti Adamson as a lot of other people, but I would say to you, definitely looking back on it in hindsight, he wanted that old guard out, and he wanted his own players in, and Bobby Kerr got caught up in that, I think. Yeah. But sometimes we said that, I'm sure this was last week, we were having a conversation. Sometimes it is just time, isn't it, to move on and have another go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that's what he does. But my understanding, Chris, is, and maybe I do think it's an important little detail. I read somewhere that Bobby Kerr came to Sunderland when he was 15 years old and has lived here ever since.
Yeah.
So even when he went to Blackpool and played at Hartlepool wouldn't be his biggest stretch, but certainly at Blackpool he maintained his home in the northeast of England and in Sunderland in particular.
Yeah.
What a servant for the club. All those games, he's misses 18 months of his career with 2 broken legs right at the start of career, and you look at his appearance stats, and geez to Betsy, marvelous character, marvelous to have him as a character at the club. He's here, he's there, he's nearly everywhere.
433 appearances and 68 goals. What an amazing record. And obviously FA Cup winning captain. Unbelievable. Just the last question for me, Kelvin, on Bobby Kerr. Because he went on to run a lot of pubs, which was the done thing back then. But, thinking about it, because normally players went to Hartlepool, and especially because Bobby Kerr went and worked with Bob Stokoe for a couple of years in his early 30s. There is this wonder, and I know in the early 90s we had George Hurd and Jimmy Montgomery on the coaching staff, but it's one of these things that he was in the area, and it's this wonder that he never once dipped his toe into coaching or ended up kind of helping the club out or anything like that.
I don't know what I can only comment on things that have been said to me about that. As I understand it, there was a rift of some kind, but I don't know whether that's correct or not, Chris. I would say to you that I'd heard that second, third hand kind of, and that for a long time he didn't cross the door at Sunderland. But I don't know. I honestly don't know what the truth of that would be. He certainly didn't. You're right. I'm not aware of him coaching or anything. I know that he does very, very fine work with the Fans Museum, doesn't he? Yeah. He does a lot of stuff with them. He's a very popular addition to that team down there, and I love to see him on the International Fans Day, fan weekend stuff. He's out and about and meeting and greeting, and so I think he still has the club, and he's, it's in his bones, exactly. And for guys like me that grew up with him, I did grow up with him. What a fantastic! The one thing I did want to say, I started to say it and went off down my own, got deflected myself, if you want. For me, one of his best ever seasons for us was our championship winning season, the 75-76. He played some great football in that season, and he made the PFA team of the season. He was fantastic in that season, fantastic captain when we had a number of leaders on the pitch, Bobby Kerr is for instance being one of them. Towers, he was fantastic that season, and all his maturity, all his experience. He was a big part of that promotion at long last. Yeah. Promotion that felt like a long time in the come. I was really glad he was part of that. Yeah. He's not. We shouldn't just remember him for the cup. And I'm dropping the cup. That shouldn't be all that we remember him for. He was a fantastic captain in that promotion-winning season.
I don't care that he dropped it. He just got the chance to pick it up in the first place. That's the main thing, Kelvin. But absolutely brilliant. Love talking about Bobby Kerr. And we'll finish off our 30th to the 31st, because finish off on the August the 30th. We moved to 1994. We drew 2-2 with Grimsby Town at Roker Park last minute. 5 Mendonca penalties for Grimsby Town, because he loved scoring against the lads, didn't he? And the other story in 1994, actually on that day, was that Bob Murray was trying to tempt Sir Tom Cowie into buying the club, but I'm sure we might get into that on another day. August the 30th, 2002, Tor Andre Flo signed from Glasgow Rangers. It was a club record fee at the time of roughly 6.75 million. And on the same day, Marcus Stewart signed for Ipswich for substantially less, actually. And it was on the eve of the transfer deadline, which had just been imposed. So that was the first time we had that transfer dead window, and that was the first time we panic buyed, if you like, on that transfer window. And to finish off the 30th, in 2014, Sunderland lost at Queen's Park Rangers with a goal from Charlie Austin. And our last day, we go into August the 31st. 1921, Charlie Buchan scored twice as we beat Burnley 3-2. 1946, and we talked about the World Wars impacting football before. Well, in 1946, on the 31st of August, the Football League resumed after a 7-year break. That was caused, obviously, by World War II. But on that day, Roker Park witnessed a very unusual sight in that Rich Carter led out the opposition as he was captain of Derby County on that day. And Sunderland won 3-2 in front of almost 50,000. And we moved to 1968. We drew 1-1 with Newcastle United at Roker Park. Colin Suggett equalised for the lads with around 20 minutes left. I'll just quickly ask you, Kelvin, can you remember who scored for Newcastle that
day? Was it Pop Robson?
It was Pop Robson. Golden star for you, yeah.
I'll tell you, we were lucky that day. Yeah. They turned over that day. We were lucky to get away with a draw. Well, but what a goal from Suggett.
I'll tell you what.
Another brave lad.
This week back in the day has been fantastic against the Mags, hasn't it? We've been through all of them. But going on to 2000, Brazilian centre-half Emerson Thome, who we mentioned earlier, leaving for Bolton Wanderers. Well, on the 31st, he was signed from Chelsea again for a record fee of £4.5 million. We move on to 2002, when Sunderland entertained Manchester United. And this was just after the 2002 World Cup, which kicked off in Saipan in terms of the Republic of Ireland squad. And then Roy Keane, surprisingly, maybe he got sent off for elbowing his fellow Irish international, Jason McAteer. And obviously they've been friends ever since, if you listen to some of the comments. And the funny thing is about this, Kelvin, was that Niall Quinn was potentially the only man in the whole world who would attempt to shake Roy Keane's hand as he'd just been sent off. And I don't know if you remember Alex Ferguson's reaction on the sideline. But
he's such a wind-up merchant, Quinny, wasn't it? We all think that he was an intellectual diplomat, you know. He's a bloody wind-up merchant, so he was.
The only man ever to try and shake his hand as Roy Keane's walking off the pitch after getting a red card. And Alex Ferguson made his feelings perfectly clear on what Quinn was trying to do. But
McAteer wasn't short of a bit wind-up as well.
I remember being at the game and thinking he was doing the old violin at Roy Keane.
Put it in your
book, which had just come out, hadn't it? But brilliant.
They're making a film about that, actually.
I know, yeah, isn't it?
Just as a little aside.
Doesn't Steve Coogan play Mick McCarthy, I think?
Yeah. What a great choice for Mick Mac. Brilliant.
It'll be interesting that when it comes out.
I will go and I'll definitely make an effort to go and see that.
Wonder if he gets the Yorkshire accent right. I mean, it's not a tough one to do, is it? But yeah, 2006, Roy Keane goes straight into the transfer market, and it's deadline day. 6 players: David Connolly, Graham Kavanagh, Liam Miller, Stan Varga, Ross Wallace and Dwight York are all pulled to Sunderland. Dwight York, obviously, he moved from Sydney to Sunderland, which is always something that'll blow my mind. But again, on just to round us off, on the 31st of August, we moved to 2010 and Sunderland signed Asamoah Gyan, which was a huge signing at the time. But we quickly finish off with the quiz question because Andrew has had to run off because I think he wants to make sure he rejoins the Len Shackleton fan club after some comments he made earlier on, I think. And I think he's got some family members to apologise to. So I think he had to run off. But his quiz question that he left behind was based on the 1st of September. So this is something we'll cover next week. 1st of September 1956, Sunderland ran out 8-1 winners with goals from John Hannigan, who got a hat-trick, Len Shackleton got a brace, Ray Daniel scored, Stan Anderson scored, and Kelvin's mate, Charlie Fleming, was also on the score sheet. But on that day, who were the opposition? So again, 1st of September 1956, Sunderland won 8-1. And who were the opposition? That is today's quiz question ahead of next week. But I think that's such an epic one, including a brilliant kind of Kelvin segment going on about an absolute Sunderland legend. We should probably leave it there for this week. But Kelvin, it's been an absolute joy and a pleasure as always. Thank you very much once again, mate.
Thanks for indulging me.
And, we go on in these podcasts. Again, we don't mean to go on this long. It just happens. But Kelvin, I could do another couple of hours if I had the time. Easy. I mean, I'm talking mentally, maybe not physically, but mentally I could.
Our lass has just come in, Chris.
All right, well, good time to finish it up then. But brilliant once again, Kelvin.
Okay, cheers,
Good
man.
stuff. And thanks again for everyone for listening. We appreciate any sort of feedback. We quite often get things wrong. We do a lot from memory. So please correct us and tell us some stories if you've got more stories, because obviously we just don't have time to pack them all in. We wish we did. We wish we had 10 hours to record each of these, but we just haven't got the time that we'd want. But please keep giving us feedback on this. We love to hear some of the old stories about some of the players that we mentioned. And of course, this week we'll have all the build up to the next fixture, and we'll have it on our daily releases on Haway The Podcast, of course. But from us, bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.